The Bard of Hogwarts. This video is purely for entertainment and does not infringe on copyrights or laws. The rights to the novel and image belong to the original author. We do not claim ownership. Don't like waiting and want to listen to this fanfic in full now? Subscribe to our Patreon, where you'll find the best fanfics. Chapter 351 Home Visit. Voldemort knocks on the door. The Christmas dinner lasted until midnight. Although dancing was physically demanding, the young wizards in the castle seemed to carry a tonic of vitality with them. Even after many had danced for hours, they still felt a desire to enjoy the dance. Perhaps today's dance would be an unforgettable moment for many, especially for the 7th-year students. As midnight approached, the young wizards of other years, though still reluctant to leave, also chose to return to their dormitories. Only the 7th-year students remained reluctant to leave, as if bidding a final farewell to their student days. But no matter what, the Christmas dinner concluded successfully. December 25th. The 10-day Christmas break began. Although the professors were considerate enough not to assign too much homework, the 1st and 2nd years still felt a sense of unease during this period. This was because the young wizards and witches from the 3rd year onwards could explore Hogsmeade during the day, while the 1st and 2nd years had to stay in the castle. Of course, this well-behaved behavior needs to be qualified. While a badger might be well-behaved, one can't expect a lion cub to be well-behaved. Fortunately, Professor McGonagall was prepared for this. Filch, the castle keeper, was once again called upon to take charge. During the day, he stood sullenly at the castle gate, carefully watching every student passing. Mad-Eye Moody, the newly appointed gamekeeper, was also entrusted with a significant task. He was temporarily stationed in Hogsmeade, using his magical eye to catch any students who managed to slip past Filch's defenses. However, no matter how prepared the castle was, Ino had little to do with it. At 9 in the morning, after getting up and washing, he and Hermione returned to Hogsmeade. With the help of the Blue Lantern, they enjoyed a hearty breakfast together, and Hermione, acting as hostess, began decorating the 2nd-floor rooms. Nearing noon, Ino sat bored in the 1st-floor living room, the fireplace crackling with a roar. With the arrival of another person, the atmosphere in the cottage had become much warmer. I don't know what Hermione was upstairs busy with. In just 3 hours, she'd already made 4 trips out, each time returning with a large bag of groceries. Ino half slept on the sofa, listening to the soothing white noise, and gradually his eyes drifted closed. But soon, the clock in his room chimed again, exactly 12. It's noon. Ino opened his eyes, but still didn't get up. Instead, he muttered to himself, Blue Lantern. Prepare lunch, try to keep it light, breakfast was too heavy. However, the expected response didn't come, not even the Blue Lantern. The sudden change made Ino sit up straight. Knock. 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 Then, a rhythmic knock sounded outside. Hearing the knock, Ino stood up and walked towards the door. With a soft click, the door opened. Upon seeing who was coming, he froze in his tracks. Black robes, a flat nose, a bald head, and scarlet eyes. Well, he'd been blocked by Voldemort. Even more outrageous, he was carrying a bag of gifts, like a friend visiting on Christmas. Good day. Voldemort drawled elegantly. I'm sorry to bother you, but I believe we've met before. Meanwhile, Ino had begun calling for the Phoenix, but surprisingly, neither Cribbeth nor Fiddle appeared. Outside, Voldemort seemed to sense something. He placed a hand on his chest, bowed slightly, and said, I apologize for taking these small steps. After all, I came with good intentions, and it would be a shame if I didn't see the owner of the house. As Voldemort finished speaking, the previously clear sky over Hogsmeade suddenly began to snow. A chill wind howled through the air, and Ino's shadow gradually twisted and stretched, a faint black mist rising. Ino, is anyone here? Hermione's crisp voice echoed from the 2nd floor. In a split second, the snowflakes in the sky seemed much smaller, and the black fog vanished. No. You should stay upstairs. It's best to take a nap at noon, Ino said calmly, and the door to the 2nd floor was frozen shut. Voldemort watched silently, waiting until the frost had completely frozen the door before he slowly spoke. Wouldn't you like me to come in and sit down? I brought your favorite butter toffee. Very well. Please come in, Senior. Ino nodded slightly, then made way. At this point, there was nothing he could do. Voldemort's mention of butter toffee clearly showed that he had done his due diligence. Not only had he set up a spell to prohibit apparition, but even the Phoenix was restricted. Even Hermione, now in the room, and Dumbledore, who had left last night, were part of his plan. Meanwhile, upon hearing the invitation, Voldemort politely replied with a thank you and then walked gracefully into the room. Even though you might not eat it, I still want to praise Mr. Ferrim's cooking. The taste remains unchanged. Inside the room, Voldemort spoke with a hint of nostalgia, casually placing the Honeydukes printed paper bag on the coffee table. Please sit down. Although a little surprising, Ino plopped down on the sofa, sighing softly, but what really surprised me was your state, Senior. While seemingly chatting casually on the sofa, he was actually buying Hermione some time. On the second floor of the cottage. At first, Hermione ignored the response from downstairs and continued decorating the room. However, turning back, the icy words on the door caught her attention. Use the window, escape from here, light the feather, and have Crabbe take you back to the castle. Upon seeing these words, Hermione didn't hesitate, immediately drawing her wand and heading for the window. Thanks to the cottage's Victorian architecture, the second floor wasn't high, just over 3 to 4 meters. But to avoid making any noise, Hermione quietly cast a transfiguration spell, transforming a rope into a ladder. After securing it, she flung up her robes without a word and stepped out the window. Meanwhile, in the first floor living room, Ino helplessly covered his forehead. As he watched, a rope ladder suddenly slid down from the window opposite him, its knotted shape even colliding with the window, making a slight noise. Honestly, this subtle sound wouldn't have been noticeable, and most people wouldn't have noticed. But unfortunately, this visitor was truly extraordinary. Just as he was preparing for Voldemort's attack, he heard the other person's voice again. You could have let her take the stairs. I'm just visiting. I really don't mean any harm this time. Hearing this, Ino didn't immediately respond. He watched Hermione descend the ladder, and only breathed a sigh of relief when her figure completely disappeared from his sight. Thank you for your kindness, Senior. Now, let me tell you the purpose of our visit. Zia Odie's sharing today, Honeydukes Sweet Shop. Mr. Flume, this chapter isn't a name I made up, it's authentic content. Honeydukes Sweet Shop, located in Hogsmeade, sells chocolates and a variety of other magical sweets and is beloved by Hogwarts students and teachers. The shop is run by Ambrosio Flume, whose wife helps out upstairs while he restocks the cellars. Every Christmas, the shop is packed with customers, making it nearly impossible to move. The cellar is filled with crates and other wooden boxes, and the floor is dusty and gray. A long wooden staircase leads to the shop above. From the cellar, one can hear the shop doors opening and closing above, accompanied by the ringing of bells. Chapter 352, Calm Voldemort. Hogsmeade, at Christmas time, was enveloped in a faint chill. The sudden flutter of snow from the sky made Mad-Eye Moody raise his head. You go back now. I'll pretend I don't know about this, Moody said to the two young wizards in front of him, clearly no more than third graders. The two young wizards, faced with a madly spinning magical eye, nodded in agreement, also with lingering fear. Yes, sir. We'll go back now. The two exchanged a glance, each puzzled, but without stopping, they sprinted off in the opposite direction. Meanwhile, Hermione, after descending the rope ladder, also ran out of the residential area near the hut, making her way to Old Bant's alchemy shop. From the deserted area just now to the bustling crowd, Hermione's expression relaxed. She spotted Mad-Eye Moody not far away, but after careful consideration, she pulled a bright orange feather from her inner pocket. With a low chirp, Cribbe instantly appeared on Hermione's shoulder. Cribbe, take me back to the castle, Hermione whispered. A flash of orange light passed, and the man and the phoenix vanished instantly. Not far away, Moody watched the entire process. After the figure vanished, his magical eye stopped spinning frantically. As he looked up at the snowflakes, a curious expression crossed his face. He seemed to marvel at the youth's whims. Following Hermione's departure, a magical scene unfolded on the first floor of the cottage. Surprisingly, the atmosphere in the living room had become much more harmonious, at least on the surface. What's the purpose of your visit? Voldemort smiled faintly. Although this made his face look even more terrifying, his elegant demeanor was fully revealed. I know, may I call you that? What I'm trying to say is that you should have met the renowned Nicholas Flamel this summer, arranged by a certain eccentric professor. As if to add to his persuasiveness, Voldemort pulled a 3-inch cinescope from his pocket, his pale hand gently stroking the patterned edge. What a remarkable product. If I were your professor, I would also introduce such a brilliant student to legendary alchemist. As Voldemort finished speaking, Ino leaned back on the sofa and spoke slowly. Of course. You can call me Ino. But the cinescope is ancient knowledge, I've simply resurrected it from history. He held no pride in the cinescope. To be honest, everything about it came from the two-way mirror and the mirror of Erased. Even the alchemical formulas were inspired by the single spiral curves found in the two-way mirror. Voldemort smiled non-committally at Ino's modesty and dropped the subject, saying, "Since you've met Mr. Flammel, I imagine he's told you that many high-end alchemical items are incomplete." Listening to the words, savoring the tea. By that moment, Ino had formed a rough idea. Voldemort's quest for immortality seemed unwavering, or perhaps rekindled. This also seemed to explain why Voldemort, now utterly mad and paranoid, had become calm and rational. It made sense, considering his hopeless pursuit, to suddenly find a sudden turn of events. Even Newton in his later years wouldn't have remained mad. First floor of the cabin. Ino sat on the sofa, quietly listening to Voldemort's narration. So, what I'm saying is, it's not just powerful alchemical items that are incomplete. Ordinary things, even joke props, are like this too. It's just that no one wants to delve into it. The ancient Egyptian pyramids, the pharaoh's tombs, the Mesopotamian plains, the glorious civilization of Mesopotamia, even the civilization left by giants in Albania, the civilization of centaurs and mermen. From all the visible historical relics, it's all true. Voldemort spoke calmly, but his tone was filled with regret and emotion. Meanwhile, after Voldemort's narration came to a close, Ino fell into thought. He didn't question whether Voldemort was lying, because that was pointless. A casual looking glass could verify authenticity, and the Philosopher's Stone and Time Turner were indeed incomplete. In the room. As Ino fell into thought, Voldemort also stopped talking. A brief silence fell on the first floor of the cabin. For a moment, the fireplace seemed to become the centerpiece of this small world. It burned quietly, the flames dancing among the wood, crackling. The firelight reflected on the walls, tinting everything around it with a faint orange-yellow hue. A long pause. "So? Senior, are you telling me all this just for this?" Ino asked calmly. Before he could reply, he slowly added, "Honestly, I have no intention of doing anything else. Besides, given your current state, many things are in the past." The answer seemed somewhat conciliatory, but he had thought it over for a long time. He didn't want to provoke Voldemort in his rational state, not because he was afraid, but because it wasn't worth it. At this moment, Ino felt a bitterness within him. The old headmaster was probably no match for him. It was like two people playing wizard chess. Dumbledore could only play by the rules, one move at a time. Voldemort, however, could occasionally break the rules and make 2, 3, or even more moves in a row. Of course, if the player's skills were too different, a few extra moves wouldn't matter. But in reality, the two were truly at the same level. Voldemort was weaker, but not completely defenseless, as was immediately apparent. Though seemingly orchestrated to lure Dumbledore away, Voldemort made no secret of his whereabouts, appearing openly in Hogsmeade and even taking time to buy candy at Honeydukes. All of this, including the news of his resurrection, was likely deliberately intended for Dumbledore. Which snake, though soft in texture, when it trembles, its fangs are venomous and deadly. Ino's mind drifted to this phrase, a proverb widely circulated in the desert. Though his thoughts raced, only a few seconds passed in reality. Upon hearing Ino's conciliatory words, Voldemort suddenly smiled. It was hard to believe that such a terrifying face could ever smile with such brilliance. "We're classic Slytherins. That's great, really. Even if you killed the king snake, it's just Slytherin's pet." Hearing about the basilisk should have surprised him, but Ino remained calm. In fact, he'd stopped being surprised the moment Voldemort brought out the butter toffee. 5 months had passed since summer vacation, and who knows what Voldemort had figured out. The mention of the basilisk meant the Horcrux notebook. But from beginning to end, Ino couldn't figure out what it was about him that attracted Voldemort. He'd ignored Harry and gone to great lengths to find out about his past interests, even going to the trouble of luring Dumbledore away. Chapter 353 The Truth is Revealed, the Whole Story. Hogwarts during the holidays. Even though many students opted for Hogsmeade, the castle still seemed exceptionally bustling. Gryffindor Common Room. A flash of orange light flashed, and Hermione's figure appeared out of nowhere. "Merlin's beard!" Ron exclaimed from a corner of the common room. But after taking in the sudden appearance, he unconsciously murmured, "They haven't even gotten married yet, and the phoenix is already hers." Ron's voice wasn't loud, but it was also loud. His reflexive words elicited snorts of disapproval from many of the girls in the common room. As the center of the incident, Hermione had no time to dwell on this. After confirming she was at Hogwarts, her first thought was to seek help. Without further delay, Hermione decisively left the common room, holding Crabapple in her arms. 8th floor corridor. Hermione stood before the fat lady's portrait, momentarily lost in hesitation. Time was running out, and she wasn't sure who to turn to. Before leaving the common room, she had initially intended to seek out Dumbledore. But then she thought of this morning's Daily Prophet report. The headmaster should still be at the International Confederation of Wizards. A few seconds later, the hesitation in Hermione's eyes vanished, replaced by a determined look. "Crimsonbush, take me to the castle's underground corridors." Meanwhile, the Slytherins in the castle's basement suddenly noticed something strange. The Gryffindor girl who had barged in alone a year ago was back again today. But unlike last time, when they just watched the scene unfold, many people spontaneously made way for her. Putting aside yesterday's ball, the phoenix in her arms alone spoke volumes. While many might not recognize Dumbledore's phoenix, the orange and red Crimsonbush was familiar to many Slytherins. After all, with the widespread use of cinematography, the grandeur of the Quidditch World Cup was also being treasured. Hermione once again found herself in the castle's basement. After a brief moment of adjustment, she headed towards the potions office. As for Crimsonbush, she held her tightly, showing no sign of letting go. In the castle, Hermione knocked on Snape's office door. Far away in his little hut in Hogsmeade, Voldemort also made his request. "In all that is incomplete, I see wholeness. So, do you still have the die?" Ino was stunned by the sudden mention of the die, but after a brief moment of reflection, a flicker of realization crossed his eyes. He had found the root of the problem. Apparently, during the summer of his first year, to avoid being alone with Voldemort, he had once held the die in his hand, a life-saving device. It's still there. After a moment's thought, Ino pulled the die from its inner lining. Given today's situation, Voldemort had clearly come prepared. If nothing worked, there might be a second or third attempt. Ino took out the die and placed it flat in his palm, while Voldemort seemed a little agitated. His scarlet eyes grew brighter. Like two red magic lanterns, they stared intently at the die in Ino's hand. "Yes. That's right. I knew that behind perfection there must be complete rules. Ha 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 ha." Sitting on the sofa, Voldemort suddenly laughed out loud. There was relief and a sigh in his laughter, but more of a sense of fulfillment. A moment later, the laughter died down, and Voldemort's gaze no longer fixed on the dice. He slowly raised his head, a softer expression on his face. Then, "If it's possible, please generously give me the dice. Galleons, gold, potions, or anything else. You can ask for anything." Hearing Voldemort's proposal, Ino shook his head decisively. "I'm sorry, but I haven't found anything more precious so far. Honestly, if Voldemort wanted the divination sieve, it might be possible to exchange it under the right conditions. But the one in his hand wasn't just to save his life, but also a coordinate to Mr. Haunce's world, and a chance to be the protagonist of a story again. Even the intact Philosopher's Stone wouldn't be enough to exchange for something like that." Meanwhile, Voldemort, upon hearing his proposal decisively rejected, showed no sign of anger. Instead, he spoke again, calmly, "You don't want to. That's fine. Transactions are always based on mutual consent, not coercion. However, I hope you can take me to the place where it was found. Furthermore, your previous promise still stands. The conditions are still yours. I doubt you'll be refused this time." Voldemort's voice rose and fell, and so far, even after being rejected, he had remained strictly polite. Honestly, for a moment, Ino had considered giving in. He didn't want to provoke Voldemort in this state. But in reality, Voldemort's two proposals, while seemingly easy, were actually quite difficult. Taking him to the place where the dice were found? If all the Horcruxes were collected, Ino wouldn't mind taking Voldemort to the sanctuary for another rule-based kill. But it was clear that, including Harry, he only had 6. After all these years in the wizarding world, he no longer lived alone under a bridge. Whether it was Hermione, Draco, Snape, or any of his other friends. He couldn't afford to gamble, much less was he willing to take it. It offered no benefit, other than simply making a mortal enemy of the rational Voldemort. Faced with Voldemort's proposal, Ino experienced a dilemma for the first time. Meanwhile, Voldemort, noticing Ino lost in thought, didn't rush him. Instead, he leisurely opened a paper bag beside him, took out the candy he had just bought, and began to eat it at a leisurely pace. Time slipped by. As Voldemort picked up his third piece of candy, Ino slowly said, "If you don't mind, please wait here for a moment, Senior." With that, he vanished from the spot where he had been. The moment Ino vanished, Voldemort, who had been so relaxed, suddenly sat up straight. The smile he had worn since entering the room vanished. The relaxed expression on his face was gone, replaced by a look of deep thought. His scarlet eyes half closed, carefully examining his surroundings. After a while, Ino reappeared on the sofa, and the room erupted in rhythmic applause. "Brilliant. Truly brilliant. Your Excellence is beyond my expectations." Voldemort applauded, his voice filled with wonder. Unlike the Ministry's prefabricated props, Voldemort's personally imposed prohibition of apparition was a strict constraint, and no one knew better than him. Even if Dumbledore arrived, he would have been forced to sit still. The only way to leave this room was to walk out. Ino didn't respond to Voldemort's praise. Instead, he pulled a few items from his pocket and placed them on the coffee table in front of him. 3 gemstones, and another wooden dice. Unlike the irregular polyhedron sieve from before, the dice were standard hexahedrons, clearly engraved with the numbers 1-6. After putting everything in place, Ino also looked at Voldemort with a smile. In fact, both the divination dice and a few scattered gems were originally in his pocket. However, compared to taking them out directly from his pocket, returning to the shelter in front of Voldemort is the most correct approach. Magic can restrict the phoenix, house elves, and even blue lights, but it cannot restrict the uniqueness of the shelter. A slight show of power can have a very good effect. In comparison, compared to Voldemort's confident expression since he entered the door, Ino prefers his current expression, which is puzzled and solemn. "Excuse me, I still cannot meet the senior's request. I can't go to that place. However, there are a few things here that can be exchanged." Chapter 354, The Oncoming Life-Taking Curse, A Confrontation in Midair. Hogsmeade was peaceful and tranquil during Christmas. But today was a bit strange. Although it usually snowed at this time of year, it rarely snowed like today, starting at noon and continuing uninterrupted. Outside the window, the wind and snow howled, blanketing the ground in white. Inside the cottage, there was a quiet and peaceful atmosphere. Perhaps it was because of his recent disappearance, or perhaps for some other reason, but even after being rejected for the second time, Voldemort didn't immediately get angry. He first carefully examined the gems and dice on the table, then a hint of disappointment crossed his face. "Can't go? Can you tell me why?" Sitting on the sofa, Voldemort reached out and gently rubbed his brow with his index finger. "Going means death. Honestly, I don't want to do that, it's not worth it." Ino said calmly, her eyes fixed on Voldemort's. For a moment, the two of them stared at each other calmly, neither speaking. A long moment passed. "I believe you," Voldemort said slowly. "But this also troubles me. Only death? Is there no solution?" "I don't know." Ino shook his head slightly. "But right now, it's a dead end. Honestly. If it weren't for your special circumstances, I would have taken you with me." "Ha ha ha. You're truly a true Slytherin." Voldemort chuckled, but then changed the subject. "You say you don't know, but that actually means there's a solution." "Maybe there is, maybe not, but I really don't know." Ino answered directly and honestly, without hiding anything. After all these years, he still hadn't fully grasped the nature of Sanctuary, the controlled Acromantula, the suddenly appearing valley, or even the controlled Phoenix Fiddle. He truly had no idea what would happen in the future. Besides, lying to people like Voldemort and Dumbledore was pointless. It wasn't that they were afraid of legilimency, but even if they managed to deceive someone once, they could easily recover. Unless Sanctuary completely banished him from this world, lying was not only immature but also foolish. Voldemort leaned back quietly on the sofa. Hearing the answer, he nodded slightly and said, "I trust my feelings. They tell me you're not lying about this, so I trust you too." He then slowly sat up straight, pondered for a moment, and spoke again, But, you need to be worthy of my trust. As his words fell, an invisible pressure suddenly rose from Voldemort, so intense that even the flames in the fireplace seemed to be extinguished. Meanwhile, as Ino felt the pressure, a word emerged in his mind: ocean. The ocean always seems calm, but it can suddenly surge into a raging sea. Despite the thought, Ino didn't hesitate. The shadows beneath his feet were like boiling ink, like a black river, instantly filling the entire room. From the black fog, countless shadows, seemingly solid, rose. Their bodies resembled skeletons, but they wore tattered armor and wielded spears, swords, shortbows, and other weapons. They rushed towards Voldemort. Forsaken and cursed mountain dwellers from Middle-earth made their first appearance in the wizarding world. Avada, come and eat the melon. Voldemort raised his hand and decisively unleashed the killing curse. The green beam, symbolizing death, pierced through several soldiers in succession. While none of the ink shadow soldiers died, the curse remained unblocked. Nearby, Ino saw the green beam blazing towards him and vanished from the spot, perfectly dodging the killing curse. Seeing Ino vanish, Voldemort breathed a sigh of relief. The moment he cast the killing curse, he regretted it. His purpose was to understand the rules behind the dice, not to cause slaughter. His sudden attack was a demonstration of power, just as the opponent had cunningly vanished and reappeared, demonstrating his power through action. Voldemort had intended this, but as the black mist enveloped him, a subtle irritation made him instinctively unleash his most convenient magic. But after seeing the opponent dodge, he decided to call it a day, to avoid any unforeseen consequences. However, so many things in this world are often wishful thinking. Voldemort was about to stop, but Ino was completely enraged. Although he narrowly avoided the first of the 3 unforgivable curses, he still remembered the deadly aura of the killing curse. This was the first time he had been so close to death, especially without the dice in his hand. Thinking of this, Ino tightly grasped the life-saving dice in his hand. Then, he decisively left the shelter and reappeared in the hut. As mentioned before, Hogsmeade is always quiet and peaceful during Christmas. But today, at some point in the afternoon, this peace was broken. A violent and cold wind blew, mixed with countless snowflakes like goose feathers, and the whole world turned visibly pale. And that was not the end. It should have been a bright afternoon, but at some point, the sky was covered by a huge, vast black smoke, and in an instant, it seemed as if it had entered the evening. At that moment, from the thick black smoke, hundreds of thousands of skeletal soldiers, clad in medieval armor, bearing weapons and grim faces, emerged. No one has ever calculated the size of Hogsmeade. But one thing is certain, the number of wizards and witches residing in Hogsmeade could even exceed 60% of England's total wizarding population. In this scene resembling a natural disaster, the wizards and witches currently in Hogsmeade raised their heads without exception. In the sky, approximately 100 feet above the ground, or even higher, 2 wizards floated in the air, unaided by any props. At a height of 100 feet, or about 30 meters, no equipment was needed, and everyone could clearly see the 2 floating figures with a naked eye. I know. That man has been resurrected. Swinburne. The Dark Lord. The wizards and witches in Hogsmeade murmured unconsciously. The difference was that the students at Hogwarts only knew Ino, while many adult wizards recognized the Dark Lord, who had once brought darkness and madness to England. There were differences, but also unity. Just like now, whether adult wizards or Hogwarts students, anyone carrying a videoscope invariably turned it towards the sky. Unlike the others who gazed upward, Mad-Eye Moody reacted immediately. He didn't even bother catching the young wizard. He drew his wand and shouted, "All students, now! Run to Hogwarts! Run back and tell McGonagall to activate her defensive spells." As he spoke, Moody produced what looked like a poorly made galleon. The reason it was poorly made was that the coin looked like a galleon, but the abbreviations of the Ministry of Magical Law Enforcement were printed on the front. Moody's shouting awakened many young wizards, especially the Ravenclaws, who rushed towards the castle without looking back. However, many remained unmoved, their gazes fixed eagerly on the sky, most of them Slytherins. At the same time, Professor McGonagall, whom Moody had mentioned earlier, was now soaring on her broomstick, on the path to Hogsmeade. Beside Professor McGonagall, there were 2 others. Professor Fillowy, head of Ravenclaw and former international dueling tournament champion, and Madame Maxime, headmistress of Boxplittons, who rode atop a roan horse. Filius, Go down and oversee the students' retreat." From her broomstick, Professor McGonagall could already see the two men facing off in midair. Similarly, she could see the panicked students running below. Ziodes sharing today, the killing curse, Avada Kedavra. The killing curse is the first of the 3 unforgivable curses and a death curse. It is one of the most powerful and evil spells in the wizarding world. When cast, a dazzling green light emits from the wand, instantly killing the victim, usually without leaving a trace. When successfully cast on a living person or creature, the curse causes instant and painless death without any sign of physical violence. This is an extremely cruel form of dark magic. If used on a human, the perpetrator, if apprehended by the Ministry of Magic, will be sentenced to life imprisonment in Azkaban. The killing curse is generally unstoppable, so spells such as the shield charm cannot resist it. Chapter 355 The Power of Ice and Snow Magic. On the path leading to Hogsmeade, Professor McGonagall's expression stiffened instantly upon catching sight of the distant figure. She could never forget the figure floating in the air. It was the man who had single-handedly brought over a decade of darkness and terror to the British Isles. "Oring, you and Phileas go down below. I can handle Ino myself." Professor McGonagall turned and addressed Madame Maxime again. She had no choice. The man was the headmaster of Oaksbuttons, a genuine foreign guest. Nothing could happen there. She had thought it was just a commonplace incident, but she hadn't expected the situation to unfold. Regardless, there were still countless students in Hogsmeade who hadn't evacuated in time. After giving her instructions to the two, Professor McGonagall, with a resolute expression, flew alone towards Hogsmeade. As she drew closer to Hogsmeade, the snowflakes suddenly stopped falling. It wasn't just the snow that had stopped falling, it was the snow that enveloped a vast area, including Hogwarts, and suddenly stopped floating in midair. Flake after flake, as if controlled by an invisible force, began to spin slowly in a clockwise direction. At the same moment, every wizard in Hogsmeade, including several professors, witnessed a stunning scene. In midair, Ino seemed to transform into a deity controlling ice and snow, with snowflakes swirling around him, covering the sky and obscuring the sun. In a fleeting moment, the falling snow gathered into a white curtain, gathering and undulating in the sky. Then, like a surging wave, it rushed towards Voldemort across the way. The instant they flew, the snowflakes changed form again. They were no longer ordinary flakes, but pure white billywigs. A veritable sea of billywigs with 1-inch stingers. And higher up in the sky, like a dark boggart-like fog, all the cursed mountaineers launched their attack. Hundreds of archers drew their bows and fired, while countless mountaineers armed with spears, swords, and other short weapons swooped down like ghosts. This time, Ino held nothing back. The near-death experience had forced him to unleash all his strength. Though enraged, he retained his composure. He didn't allow the boggart's black mist to descend upon Hogsmeade, nor did he even call out to fight, for the countless wizards below were clearly visible. As the sea of insects and the undead mountain dwellers converged, Voldemort, mid-air, raised his wand. Protection. Thunderbolt. Calmly, Voldemort unleashed his most effective spell. The explosive spell, a standard dark art, is often underestimated. Just like in the original story, Pettigrew used it to blow up half a street, and Seamus used it to destroy the entire lawn-covered bridge. As a high-capacity spell, its scope is determined by its power. This time, Voldemort demonstrated the correct use of the explosive spell in front of every wizard in Hogsmeade. As the words fell, a dazzling crimson beam, as thick as a baby's arm, shot from the tip of the wand. It was more like lightning streaking through the sky than magic. In an instant, the explosive spell struck a white sea of insects. As the two collided, the crimson beam pierced the cheese like a red-hot skewer, melting effortlessly. But strangely, the expected explosion didn't occur. 1 second, 2 seconds, a brief delay. Then, a boom. A series of deafening explosions echoed. Though the explosions were clearly in midair, the wizards below felt as if the ground were shaking. At that moment, many wizards, waking from their dreams, began to retreat silently. Perhaps wizards truly lacked entertainment. Interestingly, even as many mounted their brooms, one hand still clutched the 3-inch camera lens, its lens fixed firmly on the two floating in midair. This was truly amusing, like a muggle who, even though there was an earthquake, didn't forget to use their communication device to film the chandeliers shaking. The choices of the ordinary wizards below had no impact on the battle between the two men in the sky. In the instant the explosion struck, Ino felt that nearly half of the insect sea had been destroyed, along with the undead mountaineers. But even so, he paid no attention. The billowings transformed from snowflakes, while the undead mountaineers were condensed with the aid of the bog art mist. Both were expendable, practically indestructible. Winter is coming. Without a pause, Ino waved his wand again. This time, he chose not to cast wandlessly, but instead, using his Elder Wand, he unleashed the second spell of the Ice and Snow Heritage with all his might. As he spoke, a blizzard began to fall again, covering the entire sky over Hogsmeade, and even Hogwarts. Yes, a blizzard. This time, the snowflakes stopped falling. It was as if the sky had cracked open, and an endless torrent of snow poured down. The wind and snow raged, the snow so dense it was almost suffocating. In a moment, the entire sky, as far as the eye could see, was engulfed in a vast expanse of white. The billowing worms, more than half of which had been destroyed by the explosion, were instantly replenished. Furthermore, they now seemed to have imbibed a swelling potion. The entire swarm of insects had expanded more than tenfold. Regrouping, a roaring roar. The white swarm once again swept towards Voldemort. Frost shot. Ino swung his wand. This was the first ice spell he had inherited. Honestly, he had almost abandoned this near-physical attack after learning divine sharpness. But today, facing Voldemort, his original magic was once again deployed. This time, he was no longer limited by his magical power, concentrating only 3 or 5 arrows. In the story, with the magical power growth rate of a young wizard, he had been stuck like a bug, waiting for over a decade. And the results were revealed in this moment. In this uniquely gifted environment, countless arrows, condensed from pale blue ice, emerged behind Ino. Thousands of arrows, like Muggle firearms, hurled relentlessly at the enemy. With each arrow released, another quickly condensed. This cycle repeated itself, coupled with the endless sea of insects, evoking a feeling of ants devouring a fire dragon. Horizontal ellipsis. Seeing the attack had closed in a loop, Ino remained vigilant. Just then, in the hut, Voldemort's tactics had made him feel the true threat of death. The killing curse, ripping through space, struck with a single wave of his hand. Truth be told, if it weren't for the nature of the sanctuary, the killing curse would have already killed him. Every time he thought of this, he felt a mixture of fear and extreme anger. Perhaps Voldemort had initially adhered to protocol, but he was also honest and forthright, even taking out the dice for divination. And the result was the killing curse, which met him head-on. With this thought, Ino waved his wand again. Invisible strike. Invisible strike. Relying on his bog art, he adjusted his form freely in midair, casting spells at tricky angles. The invisible slicing curse also darted towards Voldemort. In fact, during the earlier confrontation, Ino had already devised a strategy. Since the opponent's killing curse was powerful, he would use endless, continuous attacks to tire Voldemort out. No matter how powerful the magic, if there was no time to use it, it was essentially useless. Chapter 356 Final Instructions, Final Punishment. The fierce battle in the sky continued. But neither Professor McGonagall nor Moody on the ground, though ones in hand, knew how to offer a helping hand. It was a feeling of helplessness, yet also of sadness. Meanwhile, Moody on the ground suddenly heard countless soft noises around him, and then many people appeared out of thin air around him. Clearly, Moody's earlier call for help had paid off. The director of the Department of Magical Law Enforcement, leading a dozen Aurors and an equally large number of striker units, rushed to the scene immediately. Amelia Bones, the current director of the Department of Magical Law Enforcement after Barty Crouch Sr., was also a fiercely determined woman. In fact, upon receiving Moody's summons, she had decisively summoned the Auror office and the members of the Law Enforcement Squad, Striker Unit, the true embodiment of the Ministry of Magic Strength. While it might have been a misunderstanding, she had chosen to trust the retired Auror. And before coming, she had even prepared herself for sacrifice, even facing death, to avenge her parents and brother. But once they arrived in Hogsmeade, Amelia realized everything was as simple as she'd imagined. A raging blizzard, an endless sea of white insects, incessant explosions, and even a black cloud covering the sky, so dark it instilled a sense of dread. They couldn't intervene in this kind of battle. Amelia felt a little discouraged, but then regained her confidence. She arranged for her entourage to set up alchemical tools in Hogsmeade, a prohibition against apparition. This time, she would leave the Dark Lord with no escape. In the sky. After the ice magic closed the loop, Ino didn't let up. He continued to unleash his divine strikes. Anyone with a discerning eye could see he wasn't going to give Voldemort any breathing room. He was brazenly using his power to overpower him. This was a cunning scheme, a calculated calculation of Voldemort's pride. Unless Voldemort completely abandoned his reputation and fled in public, he would have to endure it. Amidst the sea of white insects, Voldemort felt a sense of helplessness. But it was only a hint of helplessness. Though he seemed overwhelmed, he was truly not panicking at all. Neither the attacks from the mountain dwellers in the sky, nor the swarms of insects or the icy arrows, had actually caused him any harm. All attacks were firmly blocked by the shield charm of foot in front of him, not even a ripple. The frequent attacks of the shadowless divine edge made him wary, but that only caused the shield charm to emit a sharp, tearing sound, like metal tearing. Horizontal ellipsis. Faced with this endless onslaught, Voldemort was growing increasingly impatient. While he had no idea when Dumbledore would arrive, he didn't want to wait any longer. He also felt a flicker of regret. Demonstrating his power, it seemed inappropriate to use the killing curse. Floating in midair, Voldemort looked around, seeing nothing but a vast expanse of white. Facing the world of ice and snow, he decisively waved his wand, Fiend Fear. Unlike previous spells, this time the spell was whispered softly, yet its gentle tone held an undeniable tone. Voldemort unleashed Fiend Fire. Horizontal ellipsis. In the vast, white world, a tiny, vibrant flame suddenly rose, like a sinister mandala painted on a pristine canvas. Though at first a tiny flame, almost invisible, anyone who gazed upon it could sense its all-consuming power. Midair, a faint flame shone like an ancient beast awakening. Slowly, yet steadily, it spread, each pulse distorting the surrounding air and surging with heat. As the sea of white insects met the flame, the tiny flame displayed a greed belying its size. The billowings that obscured the sky, countless icy arrows shot forth, even the formless divine blade. Everything seemed fragile before the flame, as if it were mere toys for its amusement, annihilated at the slightest touch. Rather than vanishing, it was more like being devoured. In just a dozen seconds, the flame, barely 2 inches long, had transformed into a 20-foot-tall, 3-headed runa snake. If the previous experience had been merely sensory, now the flames truly resembled an ancient beast awakened. 2 stories high, its vibrant body like the surging magma from the depths of hell. The 3-headed runa snake, in a gesture almost provocative, slowly opened its maw, spewing flames like a sea of insects. Wherever these flames touched, they quickly grew into another runa snake, spreading rapidly across the sky like a fission virus. In an instant, the once bleak, pale world was split in two. On one side was a howling blizzard, on the other, a blazing magma resembling hell. In the skies above Hogsmeade. After the fire mimicry took shape, Ino restrained the billowing swarm and ceased all attacks. The two floated in midair, staring at each other in silence, neither speaking for a moment. Voldemort seemed to hesitate over his words, while Ino was gathering his magic. His once amber eyes and short, dark hair gradually turned a deep blue. Run. Quick. Everyone. On the ground, Moody shouted almost hysterically. But soon he froze in his tracks, looking at Amelia with a complicated expression. Apparition was forbidden throughout Hogsmeade. Run as far as you can, now. Mad-Eye Moody, the retired Auror, looked down at his prosthetic limb, then gripped his wand tightly and walked alone in Voldemort's direction. Moody, alone in the snow, limped forward. A moment later, Amelia, realizing her own recklessness, began to blame herself. But the alchemical artifact had already been set, and it couldn't be removed in a short time. Listen to Moody. Retreat. Take as many people as possible with you. Especially the children. Amelia closed her eyes in agony. After giving the final command, she followed Moody's lead. At that moment, many chose to obey the order and flee in all directions, but a considerable number also chose to follow their director and fulfill their mission, the Department of Magical Law Enforcement, dedicated to maintaining stability in the wizarding world. The rest, once tightly gripped, walked silently in Voldemort's direction. On the path leading to Hogwarts, Flitwick and Madame Maxime also felt something, and glanced at Hogsmeade in horror. Perhaps ordinary wizards didn't notice, but they both truly felt a brewing of near-annihilation magic. Just looking at each other from afar, they felt a sense of annihilation. In this situation, they couldn't even protect themselves, let alone these young wizards who hadn't yet graduated. With this thought, Professor Flitwick had already jumped off his broom. He handed his only means of flight to two young wizards who had escaped, two first-year Ravenclaw girls. It might be dangerous for two people to ride on the same broom, but no one cared about that right now. Remember my words, don't break the school rules again when you get back. Also, 3 inches will be added to your charms homework for the Christmas holidays. Looking at the students slowly rising into the air, Professor Flitwick gave his final instructions and the final punishment. Chapter 357 A Promise. Hogsmeade. 100 feet above the ground. Voldemort, sensing the aura of annihilation, immediately chose to apparate. But the result was obvious, Amelia's arrangements had worked. Now, realizing his apparition was restricted, he truly felt a twinge of regret. He regretted having tangled with such a madman. Under this kind of annihilation magic, even the caster could perish together if he wasn't careful. Only a madman would choose such a mutually assured destruction. But even then, he was well aware of the other party's mental state. Something was clearly amiss. In the sky, Voldemort's crimson eyes darted around. Suddenly, his gaze fixed on the ground below. Ho ha ho ha, how ridiculous. Voldemort burst into laughter, then said, at this hour, those children are still preoccupied with their own candy. It seems the taste of Honeydukes is truly captivating. Indeed, just as Voldemort had suspected, Ino now truly sensed something was amiss. The mind influences a wizard's magic, but magic also influences the mind. While ice magic isn't as corrosive as dark magic, its essence is pure coldness and annihilation. In such extreme cold, it seems as if life itself shouldn't exist. Of course, prolonged use of ice magic wouldn't be so severe, just as the White Witch of the past, though cold and aloof, wouldn't easily go to extremes. Unfortunately, Ino rarely used ice magic so recklessly as he did today. It was like a muggle suddenly drinking a wizard's potion. While the potion is safe and non-toxic, muggle physiques can't adapt to it. At first, watching the dancing snowflakes and the pure white expanse, Ino felt a shift in his mindset, but he didn't think much of it. As the fiend fire devoured and grew, the vibrant crimson flames became a catalyst. The fiend fire filled the sky with disgust. All that remained in his mind was the desire to extinguish the flames and return the world to pure white. Then, at the breaking point of his sanity, a familiar word echoed in his ears. Honeydukes, candy. Hogsmeade. The aura of annihilation receded slightly. Seeing this, Voldemort revived his scolding rhetoric, beginning to ramble on about Hogwarts. He touched on Christmas dinner, Quidditch, even the amusing events of the castle half a century ago. Gradually, Ino's eyes grew clearer. Sensing the aura of desolation dissipating, Voldemort abandoned his previous topic and calmly asked, is it worth it? Trading the lives of everyone here, your own, even your friends and loved ones in the castle, for a Horcrux. Regaining his composure, Ino didn't immediately respond. He knew Voldemort's true concern lay in the Horcrux and his fear that the dice would be destroyed upon his death. But he had to admit, everything Voldemort said made sense. Suddenly, Ino realized the situation had reversed, and he was now the one being manipulated. Horizontal ellipsis. A long moment passed. It's not worth it. Ino replied firmly. Then, in the same soothing tone, he asked, but Senior, are you trading your only Horcrux for my friend, for someone I care about? Is that worth it? Seeing the other party willing to talk, Voldemort breathed a sigh of relief, but the question he was asking also left him feeling helpless. After a moment, Voldemort finally gave a direct answer, not worth it either. Following the Slytherin-esque exchange, the situation seemed to have reached a stalemate. Time slipped by. This time, it was Voldemort who broke the silence. I remember you saying before that we can't go there now, but you don't know if the future can change. Yes, the future is uncertain. Ino replied honestly, without concealing or lying. How about a pact? Voldemort spoke slowly in midair. Since we both feel it's not worth it, I'll give you 10 years. During this time, we won't interfere with each other. But, my patience is limited. In 10 years, you must give me an answer. You should understand that I was once a madman. Interestingly, as Voldemort spoke of his past, a subtle smile played on his face. While seemingly self-deprecating, it was actually a harsher threat. Ino understood the threat. Okay, I promise. I think you're a man of measure. Faced with Voldemort's proposal, after much deliberation, he could only agree. He wanted to help Dumbledore, but unfortunately, Dumbledore couldn't make any guarantees. Voldemort, on the other hand, could. With his promise, even if all of England were plunged into the darkness of 15 years ago, the people he cared about would remain safe. Hermione and her parents, Draco, Snape, George and Fred, even Lucius and his wife, everyone was protected. This wasn't a display of trust in Voldemort, but rather a righteous choice based on a demonstration of strength and a balance of interests. Just as in their previous conversation, Voldemort believed no human life was worth the price of his final Horcrux. Similarly, even in his rational state, Voldemort knew that certain actions, once committed, would most likely lead to a fight to the death. Actually, this was more like the behavior of desert king cobras. When two king cobras meet, they never fight to the death, but rather entwine, seeking to dominate. Because each's venom is lethal, natural selection forces them to avoid unnecessary conflict. And of all snakes, only king cobras have evolved such a comically peaceful fighting style. The winner stays, the loser leaves, that's all. It seemed a deal was about to be reached. Senior. I have a suggestion too. Ino began slowly, not waiting for Voldemort's response before speaking. Let's keep the adult world out of Hogwarts. Meanwhile, Voldemort, after hearing the proposal, briefly considered it and agreed. All right. They're also the future of magic, as long as they don't get involved. Faced with Voldemort's high-sounding excuse, Ino simply smiled and remained silent. This had nothing to do with the so-called future, it was simply a straightforward exchange of interests. Voldemort had made the suggestion first, and he agreed. It was his turn, and Voldemort had to agree too. It was just that Voldemort was willing to give this exchange a nice excuse. In that case, today's visit is over. If you change your flavor or want a different candy, remember to let me know. With that, Voldemort waved his wand, dispelling the fiend fire, and flew away from Hogwarts. Ino floated in midair, silently watching him depart. He was tired. Dealing with Voldemort in this state was truly exhausting. Especially the other party's final words, changed the flavor of the candy. While seemingly a promise not to conduct further private investigations, they were also a warning, reminding him that he was surrounded by spies. In midair, Ino looked around, seeing a myriad of human expressions, fear, admiration, excitement, awe. But regardless of their expressions, many people, without exception, clutched their video cameras fixed on the sky, a kind of entertainment-obsessed state. Voldemort waved goodbye and departed, just as quietly as he had arrived. Hogsmeade was vast, filled with countless adult wizards, including dozens of Aurors and Striker, yet no one dared to intervene. Below, Amelia tried to intervene, but Moody's wand grip was firmly grasped. As for the remaining Aurors and Striker, knowing full well that their actions were unacceptable, none foolishly rushed forward to face their own demise. Zia Odie's sharing today, Amelia Bones. Amelia is a member of the Wizengamot. She was the head of the Department of Magical Law Enforcement at the Ministry of Magic. She was a conscientious and fair-minded woman who gave Harry and Mrs. Fig their chance to defend their case and even spoke up for Harry in court. Her parents and a brother, Edgar, were murdered by Voldemort during the First Wizarding War. She was murdered during the summer vacation of 1996, the second week of July. Due to her exceptional magical abilities and dueling prowess, the wizarding community generally believed that Voldemort himself was responsible. If you're listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means they downloaded and uploaded it without effort. We cordially invite you to visit our channel, Mundo Fanfic Novelis. There you'll find the original version of this story and you can explore many other novels of various genres. We're waiting for you to immerse yourself in a world of incredible novels. Chapter 358. Afterwards, the angry people. When the world finally returned to tranquility and the dust gently settled, the snowflakes also quietly ceased their graceful dance, silently withdrawing from the stage of Hogsmeade at some unknown moment. Leaving behind only a world shrouded in snow, a tranquil world as if time had stood still, its beauty enchanting. Horizontal ellipsis. With Voldemort's departure, Ino also slowly descended from the sky, like the last snowflake on a winter's day. After his feet touched the ground, he ignored the glances around him and headed straight back to his hut. Looking at the shattered walls before him, he was speechless for a moment. Home was gone. Perhaps it was a deep obsession in his memory, or perhaps it was the result of his wandering since arriving in the wizarding world, but his hut in Hogsmeade had, unknowingly, become the home he considered his. And now, thanks to Voldemort's arrangements, what seemed like a fight in the air was actually the hut itself destroyed. After all, in a small, enclosed environment, the boggart truly overpowered Voldemort. Horizontal ellipsis. At the same time, while many others chose silence, opting for quiet and waiting, Professor McGonagall was the first to rush over, her broom in hand. "Child, are you all right?" Professor McGonagall hurried forward, reaching out to hold Ino's arm, her face filled with concern. "Professor, I'm fine. But my home is gone." Ino turned gently to look at Professor McGonagall. For a moment, his gaze returned to the shabby little cottage before him. Hermione's morning arrangements had been ruined. There was also the transfiguration owl Professor McGonagall had given her, supposedly a gift of longevity, now transformed into a teapot. "As long as you're okay, everything else is easy." "Truly." Professor McGonagall waved her wand. Under the powerful influence of the mending charm, the shattered walls and broken furniture instantly began to mend. The mending charm, a very common spell, yet one with immense potential. During his 7 years at Hogwarts, many of the spells the young wizard learned changed, but the mending charm remained a constant in the charm's curriculum, a constant heirloom for all 7 years. As for the true potential of this magic, when Ino obtained the time rewind magic from the tower, he immediately thought of the repair spell. The difference is that the repair spell rewinds inanimate objects over a period of time, while time magic rewinds the body of the caster. Seeing the cabin restored to its pristine state by Professor McGonagall's magic, Ino felt a touch of emotion, but his expression remained unchanged. Repairing the house was actually quite easy. He hesitated because of a subtle silence, or perhaps a complete lack of reaction. The sudden and unrestrained use of ice magic seemed to have unconsciously affected his mindset. The cabin was restored to its original state, but Ino didn't enter, standing quietly in front of it. Though he stood there in silence, he was still pondering a solution. As a form of magic beyond HP, ice magic meant he had no one to turn to for advice. The only people he could think of were Lena in Middle-earth and his former mentor, Hans. Perhaps our rod could also offer some, but he wasn't sure the true gap between elemental mages and wizards. Nearby, Professor McGonagall noticed Ino's lack of movement and couldn't help but feel a little worried. "Let's go back. Let's go back to Hogwarts, back to the castle." At the mention of Hogwarts, Ino's stoic expression softened slightly. "Okay. Let's go back." Hogsmeade. As Ino and Professor McGonagall gradually vanished into the horizon, England's only wizarding community erupted in turmoil. What they had seen and heard today had shocked them, yet also filled them with utter terror. The Dark Lord from 15 years ago had returned. Young wizards were fine, many had only heard about it through casual conversations with their parents. But the situation was different for adult wizards, especially those over 30, who had experienced those years firsthand. Madness, chaos, bloodbath. The Ministry of Magic was repressed beyond belief. They had once deployed 50 strikers, only to be crushed by a single enemy. Remember, these were strikers, not aurors. The strikers were the most powerful division of the Department of Law Enforcement and the core strength of the ministry. Unlike aurors, they must learn skills like camouflage, reconnaissance, and tracking. Strikers have only one requirement: strong combat prowess. Strikers excel in armed combat, not investigating crimes committed by dark wizards. In fact, to a Muggle comparison, strikers are the military, and aurors are the police. Interestingly, when Sirius escapes from prison in the original story, Fudge publicly states that only by deploying strikers can the ruthless Sirius be apprehended. Perhaps this is why the young wizards in the castle often mention the aurors. It's primarily because the Ministry of Magic rarely deploys strikers, and many situations are easily handled by the aurors. Defeating 50 strikers in one fell swoop is just the tip of the iceberg during the Dark Lord's rampage. And Headmaster Dumbledore, the greatest white wizard of the 20th century, spent most of his time at Hogwarts protecting the castle, his occasional support providing little in the way of support. This is understandable. Whatever his titles, Dumbledore is first and foremost the headmaster of Hogwarts. But this also indirectly illustrates Voldemort's power. His might is undeniable, otherwise, he wouldn't have run rampant for so many years without being stopped. In the end, it was only thanks to a fable told by Trelawney and a baby that the Dark Ages were absurdly brought to an end. It's truly dramatic. Today, the Dark Lord openly appeared in Hogsmeade, England's largest wizarding community. Many were horrified and shocked, but then their anger turned to fury. And that anger was directed entirely at the Ministry of Magic. It was precisely because of the Ministry's incompetence that no one knew of this happening. Had it not been for their public appearance, they would have remained in the dark. Voldemort could appear in Hogsmeade at will today, in their homes tomorrow, and take their lives with a killing curse the day after tomorrow. The traditional English way of thinking was fully demonstrated in this moment. After the ice and fire ended, owls once again filled Hogsmeade, these little messengers becoming the stars of the sky. Countless owls, bearing letters or packages containing video cameras, took off from Hogsmeade, soaring high in different directions. Perhaps after today, Muggle experts would once again stand before the television, explaining natural phenomena and animal migrations. But none of this had anything to do with Ino. He was currently being forcibly placed by Professor McGonagall in a separate ward on the second floor of the castle, next to Madame Pomfrey's office. Chapter 359 Flying Owl. Professor. Listen, this really isn't necessary. In a spotless, 10-square-meter room, Ino sat on the hospital bed, offering Professor McGonagall a final protest. Hurry up and lie down. You just... Professor McGonagall ignored the protest, paused briefly, and after regrouping, said, You just... Never mind. I'll be honest, you weren't feeling well, very well. Professor McGonagall spoke candidly. She would have told any other student a white lie, but with Ino, after careful consideration, she chose to speak the truth. Faced with Professor McGonagall's candor, Ino didn't choose to hide anything either. Professor, I know everything you said, but I've already come up with a preliminary solution. Besides, it's not serious. Honestly, Ino knew his condition well. He knew it wasn't serious at all. As long as he stopped agitating himself and refrained from using magic recklessly, everything would gradually heal. After some explanation, Professor McGonagall finally grudgingly accepted. But you have to stay here for 2 days, so Pomfrey can check you out, and rest quietly. Merlin. That really scared me just now. Professor McGonagall's face paled. She was genuinely frightened. She wasn't just worried about Ino's safety, but also about the students still in Hogsmeade. There were quite a few students who hadn't evacuated. If a fight had gone on, the thought of that outcome filled her with lingering fear. Furthermore, she harbored a lingering worry that returning to the dormitory might not be the best place for Ino. Meanwhile, after seeing Professor McGonagall's expression, Ino understood. All right. I'll stay here for a few days. Speaking of which, this is my first time in the hospital wing in 4 years. But I hope it's the last time, Professor McGonagall said seriously. Their conversation didn't last long, as Madame Pomfrey pushed open the door and entered the room. Unlike her usual hasty visit with a tray, this time Madame Pomfrey even brought a cart. The car was not only filled with various bottles and jars, but also a number of unknown medical instruments. The hospital wing was quiet, but so was the entire castle. Hogwarts had 4 houses. At that moment, the 4 common rooms were equally silent. Despite being packed, no one was gossiping. Literally, you could hear a pin drop. Because everyone was gathered together, their eyes fixed on the videoscope brought back from Hogsmeade. The scene began with an aerial confrontation between 2 people, snow falling, dark clouds enveloping the sky, and skeleton soldiers looming in the mist. Over half an hour later, it ended with a sea of insects covering the sky, deafening explosions, and fire runes that competed with a blizzard. Time passed by minute. The images in the videoscope refreshed the young wizard's understanding. It turned out that magic could actually be used in this way. Whether they were Muggle-born or pure-blood or half-blood wizards, all had a single thought: Hogwarts was probably teaching them fake magic. They were turning matches into needles, making pineapples dance, levitating feathers, brewing potions for boils, even fertilizing herbs. Students from Boxburtons and Durmstrang also witnessed the scene. But both Fleur and Chrome had given up on winning at that moment, setting their sights on second place. As the Hogwarts videoscopes watched, many owls also flew to their destinations. London, Ministry of Magic. First floor Minister's office. Fudge sat quietly at his large desk, a luxurious 2-foot videoscope perched on it. On the screen was a clear close-up of Voldemort's face. Finally, as Voldemort turned gracefully, the image in the videoscope gradually faded. Though the content ended, Fudge remained seated, motionless, as if under a petrification spell. For a long moment, a weary sigh echoed through the office. Fudge had known about Voldemort's resurrection a week earlier. Dumbledore and Bartlett had visited him and explained the matter in detail. Although he hadn't taken it seriously at the time, he had taken appropriate measures. Not only had he increased the security at Azkaban, but he had also contacted some of the former pure-blood families, the Lestranges, the Malfoys, and even the Crabbles, to prepare for both scenarios, defend if possible, and join in if impossible. Despite his thorough preparations, Voldemort's sudden appearance caught him completely off guard. Not only had he not gone to Azkaban to rescue them, nor had he summoned his former subordinates who had escaped punishment, he had simply appeared in Hogsmeade. Fudge clutched his forehead in annoyance at the thought. If he had the chance again, he would have immediately pushed Bartlett and Dumbledore out, never again concealing the truth for fear of unrest. But now it was too late. It was obvious that the public would turn their attention to the Ministry of Magic, and he, the minister, would bear the brunt of the blame. A sense of melancholy and helplessness washed over him. In the quiet of his office, Fudge once again glanced at the videoscope on his desk. He had a love-hate relationship with this new gadget. He hated how clearly it captured the Dark Lord, but it also gave him a temporary sense of reassurance. The footage showed someone successfully holding off the enemy in direct combat. The Dark Lord's reputation had undoubtedly been weakened. It was like the role Dumbledore had played in those days, the spiritual pillar of England's wizarding community. The difference was that this time, it was Swinburne, a younger, more energetic student who hadn't even graduated yet, who stood in the way of the Dark Lord. "I have to go see him, bring the Daily Prophet reporter," Fudge muttered to himself as he gazed at the videoscope. Gradually, a solution to the dilemma dawned on Fudge, a strategy he had employed since his early days at the Ministry of Magic, aligning himself with the people's hopes. Back then, he'd relied on Dumbledore's presence and leveraged his reputation to smoothly navigate the transition to minister and the subsequent transfer of power. Now, it wasn't just a repeat of the past, just a different target. Honestly, there's no precise statistics on the speed of owls. While there's no exact number, there's a rough estimate. Depending on the species, owls typically fly between 45 and 100 kilometers per hour. Since the Hogsmeade incident ended, in the space of half a day, over 80% of the owls have completed their messenger missions. The letters and packages they were supposed to deliver have likely reached their recipients by now. Chapter 360, Shocking Changes, Imperious Curse. Nothing in the world seems constant. If one truly must find one constant, the only constant is that everything is constantly changing. At Professor McGonagall's insistence, Ino had already spent 2 days at the school infirmary. While there had been visits during this time, more than 90% were turned away by Madame Pomfrey, including Minister of Magic Fudge. The reason was simple: the patient needed rest. Of course, Ino acquiesced to this refusal. He cared little for the affairs of fame and fortune. All he wanted was to live a good life and make it more interesting. This was also why, after inventing the cinemascope, he gave up many of the benefits. Fundamentally, he was too lazy to manage it. Now, with Madame Pomfrey standing in the way, he was even more content. On the second floor of the castle, a quiet, private, 10-square-meter ward. Gently surrounded by flawless white walls, it resembled a tranquil world blanketed by the first snow of winter, both pure and reassuring. Sunlight gently streamed in through a carefully designed, sunny window, casting a golden veil over the small space and dispelling any gloom and chill. Beside the window, a carefully tended bouquet of hydroponic hyacinths gracefully blossomed, its slender, upright stems dotted with clusters of soft, mellow blue and purple blossoms. The petals swayed gently, and in the symphony of breeze and sunlight, a delicate fragrance emanated, bringing a sense of peace. In the ward, Ino leaned back alone on his bed, gazing at the hyacinths in the vase. The bouquet had been sent by Hermione. As he quietly gazed at the bouquet, his mind flashed back to Hermione's expression, her face brimming with raindrops, perhaps genuinely frightened. Despite his repeated explanations, Hermione remained stubbornly obedient. Consequently, Hermione's presence became a constant presence in the ward for the majority of the day. Ino simply let it go. He understood Hermione's stubbornness. Just like now, when she could have asked Blue Lantern to cook lunch, she chose to go to the Great Hall herself and serve the food, citing Blue Lantern's sole purpose as the only thing she could cook: flour cakes. As a djinn from Grimm's fairy tales, Blue Lantern's abilities were undeniable. The soldier in the story even sent Blue Lantern to the palace to abduct the princess in the middle of the night. As for the flower cakes, it could only be said that Blue Lantern followed his own rules and adhered to the basics. He didn't use anything outside of Sanctuary Valley, otherwise, there wouldn't be a single dish unavailable in this world. Thinking of Sanctuary, Ino suddenly felt a sense of anticipation for this new world. The battle in Hogsmeade had made him realize his shortcomings. He had ample area damage, but lacked high-end abilities. When it came to clearing out small enemies like orcs, even two Voldemorts combined wouldn't be a match for him. However, facing a powerful foe, the opposite was true. He lacked the decisive power. Ice and Snow Annihilation was a trump card, but it was still essentially a group spell. Ino had his own plans for Great Annihilation. He wouldn't use it until he could reach the level of the White Witch. Moreover, as a spell that annihilates all living things without distinguishing between friend and foe, if truly used, it would likely surpass Voldemort and become the true Dark Lord. Honestly, while Voldemort frightened many, the amount of slaughter he caused was truly limited, perhaps a few hundred at best. In the quiet of the ward, Ino leaned back on his bed, quietly pondering his future. He had indeed been a bit complacent recently. Granted, he had surpassed more than 99% of wizards, but Voldemort had taught him a lesson. Knock. Knock. As he pondered, the familiar knock on the door sounded again. Today we have sausages and mash, and shepherd's pie. Hermione entered, a smile on her face, carrying lunch. Oh yes. And the fresh copy of the Daily Prophet. The same old praise and denigration. They seemed to have nothing else to write about. Putting down her lunch, Hermione naturally sat on the edge of the bed, reciting the newspaper's news in rapid succession. Still? Let me see. Ino frowned subconsciously at Hermione's words. Taking the newspaper, the bold headline on the front page deepened his frown. Yesterday's news. The Dark Lord's fall. In the quiet ward, Hermione noticed something different. Ino's silence after taking the newspaper left her somewhat perplexed. She might have seemed to be teasing the Daily Prophet, but she was also proud of the content. After all, she was praising her boyfriend's excellence. What's wrong? Is there something wrong? Hermione asked softly. After a moment, Ino closed the newspaper and said casually, nothing. I just think Fudge thinks everyone is stupid. And, as he spoke, he turned to Hermione's neck. A silver thread crisscrossed her fair, delicate skin. It was the chain of her moonstone necklace. Do you think someone's targeting me? Hermione's eyes flickered with realization. In fact, the moment she noticed where Ino's gaze was, she figured it out. After all, what kind of couple would only stare at someone's neck? The only explanation was the moonstone necklace, which had protective properties. Ino was slightly surprised by Hermione's perceptiveness. After a moment's hesitation, he decided not to hide it. That's how it was at first. After all, the newspapers were a little too derogatory towards Voldemort. You know, those Death Eaters are quite extreme. But after all, I had an agreement with him. Even so, he was still concerned because the time frame was too short. After all, it had only been 2 days, and some hidden Death Eaters might not have gotten the news yet. But with Hermione at Hogwarts, there was no need to worry too much. Everything would be fine by the end of this semester and the summer vacation. Furthermore, subconsciously, he had a feeling that Fudge had ulterior motives. He was a master at flattering the powerful and drawing attention to the weak. A few minutes later, Ino finished explaining the agreement, keeping nothing secret. Honestly, while it was a bit shady, it wasn't a secret. Someone with a keen eye would eventually discover it. Huh? Actually. Hermione breathed a sigh of relief, her tone a little conflicted. But after much thought, she couldn't find the words. Her first thought was of her parents in London. Putting herself in their shoes, it seemed there was no better solution than compromise. Don't worry. His biggest mistake was giving me time. Ino said soothingly, reaching out and gently patting the back of Hermione's hand. At the same time, a burly figure approached from afar in the castle's second-floor corridor. Such a striking figure caused Madame Pomfrey to pause in her planned ward rounds. She'd seen this kind of student many times over the past 2 days, always trying to sneak into the wards under the guise of seeing a doctor. This time, however, she was surprised. This burly man couldn't even feign illness. Despite her inner disapproval, Madame Pomfrey still dutifully asked, "Child, how can I help you?" But this time, her response wasn't the usual hesitant evasion. "Your spirit is out of your body." A cold voice rang out, and Madame Pomfrey stood there, distraught. Ziodes sharing today, hit wizards. Hit wizards are specially trained by the Magical Law Enforcement Service to apprehend dangerous criminals. While their duties may appear to overlap with those of Aurors, hit wizards are more focused on armed combat than criminal investigation. To become a hit wizard, one must hold at least 5 0WL certificates, including one in defense against the dark arts, and possess a calm and composed disposition. Hit wizards receive a minimum monthly salary of 700 galleons and have access to a dedicated bed at St. Mungo's Hospital for magical maladies and injuries. In 1993, Fudge suggested that perhaps only a hit wizard could capture Sirius Black, who had escaped from Azkaban. Chapter 361 The Life Calling Curse. Wizards are often driven by emotion. Their deep-seated appreciation and devotion to emotions make them particularly sentimental. Similarly, this trait makes them value and cherish those feelings more than ordinary people. This is exemplified by many characters throughout the story. Lily's sacrifice, Snape's infatuation, Sirius's willingness to go to Azkaban to atone for his sins, and even Bella and Barty Jr.'s near-mad obsession. All of this speaks to the wizarding world's emotional nature. Of course, this obsession is also reflected in their actions. Unlike other Death Eaters, who are either cowardly yet intelligent or brave yet mad, Barty Jr. consistently possesses the strengths of both. Fiendfire, the most difficult dark magic to control, is not always easy to wield. Its backlash is always a major headache for its user, as it doesn't distinguish between friend and foe. Even a fully grown Fiendfire will initially attack its user. Currently, only one person is known to be proficient in wielding Fiendfire. After seeing the sky full of Fiendfires, he understood Swinburne's difficulty. He also understood his master's pain. Forcibly controlling so many Fiendfires was no easy task. That seemed to be the end of the matter. However, the newspaper's denigration and ridicule over the past 2 days had caused Barty Jr. extreme pain and torment. The circulating video mirror and the Daily Prophet had become the source of his suffering, the latter even more so. Whenever he thought of the contents of the newspapers, every word and every punctuation mark seemed to transform into a venomous snake, gnawing at his heart. For a follower, insulting and slandering their adored master was the most unacceptable thing. Upon learning that his master was hospitalized due to injuries and could not even receive a visit from Fudge, Barty Jr. had already begun plotting revenge. Vincent Crabbe, despite his naive appearance, was a prominent figure within Slytherin. Especially with Draco's recent launch of the school monthly magazine, his status as the only other attendant had risen sharply. "Where are you going again?" "Without me?" Goyle asked curiously in the dormitory. This question also piqued the curiosity of the others. After all, Crabbe had been so busy lately, sometimes not seen all day on weekends. "I'm going to buy some candy." "Mr. Swinburne always gives you all the Christmas candy," Crabbe said with a simple smile, a hint of jealousy in his tone, like a bullied runaway child. Goyle, hearing his answer, reached out and touched his head, and said a little embarrassedly, "How about I give you half, no, a third? You can keep it for yourself." "But thank you so much." Crabbe smiled faintly, but at the end, his heart was truly filled with emotion. As a follower of the Malfoy family since childhood, the only person he truly connected with was the honest Goyle. Besides, Goyle giving away a third of the candy might seem insignificant to others, but Crabbe knew it was a sign of true friendship. "You didn't want it." Goyle shook his massive head, then muttered softly, "It's not my fault." "Really, I gave it to you." Seeing such a familiar scene, a flicker of reluctance crossed Crabbe's eyes. But as his gaze shifted to the candy, that reluctance turned to determination. Crabbe knew Swinburne despised him, the cheap candy was evident. Even the unwanted items had been denied to him since his first Christmas. Even the errands and odd jobs were denied to him. Everything was Goyle's job, but he didn't envy Goyle, because his friend was too foolish to envy him. But everything had a source, Swinburne, who had always looked down on him. In fact, because of this subtle change, Draco no longer came to him for many things, but to Goyle instead. Crabbe pondered as he left the Slytherin dormitories. His mind raced back to his experience in Hogsmeade 2 months prior. Barty Jr. had been right, any disdain stemmed from one's own lack of ability. If one possessed immense power, one wouldn't have to be a lackey, eat leftover candy, or even play dumb all day. Even knowing it was an unforgivable curse, Crabbe relished it. 2 months of continuous study had truly given him a sense of power. If he had wanted to, none of the 4 people in the dorm would have escaped alive. His current abilities were merely the magic Bard EJR had taught him. But this morning, he received another message from Bard EJR, promising him one last thing, and not only would he meet the Dark Lord, but he could even be personally taught the dark arts. On his way to the hospital wing, Crabbe felt through his robes for the teacup in his pocket. It was the portkey Bard EJR had given him. Whether he succeeded or not, he could escape Hogwarts with a portkey. It was his only hope. On the second floor of the castle. In response to Madame Pomfrey's question, Crabbe immediately cast the Imperious Curse. This wasn't an act of mercy, he wanted to use the other person's voice to paralyze Swinburne inside, while also providing cover in case of failure. Go over, knock. Then open the door. Seeing the Imperious Curse take effect, Crabbe gave the order as planned, oblivious to the horrified look in the portrait beside him. Meanwhile, Madame Pomfrey, distraught, walked outside the ward and gently knocked on the door. Knock. Knock. After a brief thump, she gently opened it. Inside, Hermione had already jumped down from the bedside the moment she heard the knock, standing reservedly nearby. Although she didn't know who was coming, she couldn't sit by the bed, it would seem unladylike. The door opened. Pomfrey, dressed in a white nurse's uniform, appeared from the doorframe. Thank you, Madame Pomfrey. Ino turned and spoke politely from the bedside. But this time, he didn't get the usual response. Upon seeing Madame Pomfrey enter the room, he quickly stepped aside, making half a space. Behind Madame Pomfrey, a fierce-looking Crabbe also raised his wand. Avada, bite the melon. A green beam filled with hatred and the symbol of death shot straight at the bed. At the same time, the cry of a phoenix echoed in the room, and Fawkes stepped in front of Ino. Everything seemed to be a safe bet. But everyone present, including Fawkes, had overlooked someone. Standing by the bed, Hermione was the first to see Crabbe raise his wand. With a moonstone necklace imbued with a shield charm, he leaped out in a single stride. Chapter 362, 50 years later, another student dies. Faced with a sudden attack of the killing curse, Ino immediately retreated into the sanctuary. It wasn't that he didn't trust Fawkes, but having just fought Voldemort, it was an automatic reaction to the screen, death-scented magic. Just as he was leaving, he saw a figure appear before him, but it was too late. In a split second, perhaps even less. When Ino emerged, he saw the green beam had already struck Hermione. Everything changed in a flash. It was so fast that he barely had time to call upon his two phoenixes. Those star-like brown eyes lost their former brilliance as the killing curse struck. Frost shot. A sharp voice rang out, and dozens, perhaps hundreds, of sharp arrows hurled towards Crabbe. As Crabbe stared at him in bewilderment, he felt pierced through. Even as he fell to the ground, his left hand remained in his pocket. Blood mixed with ice shards, spreading out into the corridor. Ino ignored Crabbe. After casting his spell, he immediately turned to Hermione. Heal as before. Heal as before. Powerful magic, the continuous release of healing spells, filled the entire ward with a holy, bright white glow. Ah! Madame Pomfrey screamed. With Crabbe's death, the Imperious Curse was lifted. Seeing Hermione lying on the ground and Crabbe, wounded and stabbed, Madame Pomfrey, having recovered, immediately checked on the injured. At the same moment, the entire castle seemed to be enveloped in a sorrowful atmosphere. The underground corridors, the first, second, and third floors, the professors' offices, the freestanding towers, without exception, and many sentimental portraits, at this moment, began to silently shed tears. In the Transfiguration office, Professor McGonagall abruptly stood up, her usually calm gaze abruptly gone, replaced by a terrifying majesty. Perhaps others didn't understand the significance of the castle's sorrow, but 50 years ago, she was a graduate student. Back then, the castle, one day, was plunged into sorrow like this. That afternoon, everyone knew that a student named Myrtle had unexpectedly died in the castle. On the second floor, in the hospital ward. Madame Pomfrey, after a thorough examination, reluctantly accepted the reality. The two students who had fallen were completely dead. With this result, Madame Pomfrey sat dejectedly on the floor. Hogwarts hadn't had a student die in over 50 years. Today, not only had there been a death, but two at once, and even more bizarrely, right outside the hospital ward. As a healer, she was consumed by regret and self-blame. Perhaps because she had been restrained for such a short time, Madame Pomfrey gradually remembered what had happened after regaining consciousness, but this only made her feel even more guilty. If only she had been more careful, if only she had discovered it earlier. Madame Pomfrey leaned against the wall, her eyes closed in sorrow. In the ward, the healing magic continued to flicker. Horizontal ellipsis. Time passed, an unknown amount of time. Ino continued casting healing spells until his arm was grasped by another pale hand. He suddenly looked up, only to be met with a pair of empty, lifeless eyes. Stop. Snape's voice was calmer than usual, without even a trace of emotion. Hearing the warning, Ino looked around blankly. Dumbledore, Professor McGonagall, Professor Flitwick, Professor Sprout. It seemed that many people had come. But he was puzzled as to why so many people had suddenly arrived. This will be good for you, a calm voice rang in his ears. Looking at the potion Snape handed him, Ino drank it all in one gulp. A bitter and sour taste instantly filled the air, and he gradually came to his senses. Hermione, as if to save herself, blocked the killing curse. Hogwarts, this castle that has stood for 1,000 years, always seems calm and peaceful. Just like its motto, sleeping dragons do not disturb. However, a sudden piece of bad news, like a thunderclap in winter, not only awakened the sleeping dragon, but also tore apart the peace of the past. 50 years later, another student died in the castle, this time too, Vincent Crabbe of Slytherin and Hermione Granger of Gryffindor. Just 2 days had passed since the Hogsmeade incident, and this time, the victim was once again the girlfriend of one of the main characters, Swinburne. A sudden uproar erupted. The news spread like a spell, rippled through the castle, shocking every young wizard. After the entire castle was irradiated, the owl's efforts spread throughout the wizarding world. Consequently, the Daily Prophet printed another extra edition. On a rocky island in northern England, Voldemort gazed at the newspaper in his hand, feeling a pang of dread. Just 2 days, perhaps even a day and a half, after the fragile alliance had been struck, someone had presented him with such a lavish gift. He already knew who the sender was, especially after seeing Vincent Crabbe's name. Foolish. Curse. Voldemort's furious voice echoed through the abandoned lighthouse. He regretted choosing to remain hidden for the sake of safety. Even at the risk of Limfire's backlash, he should have informed Bard Jr. immediately. But no matter how much he regretted it now, it was useless. This incident would inevitably provoke a counterattack from Swinburne, and that was exactly what he didn't want to see. And the cause of all this? The battle in Hogsmeade seemed easy, but he knew that if it dragged on, he would surely fail, even if he used the killing curse. It was obvious that the enemy was cautious, only allowing the black fog to cover the sky, not the entire Hogsmeade. And the earlier instantaneous disappearance magic had also been ineffective. The latter, in particular, seemed to have a natural resistance to the killing curse. As for his final use of Limfire, it was merely a precautionary measure, to pause the endless attack and give him a chance to speak. Relying on Limfire for victory? He hadn't considered that at all. The enemy had special skills of disapparition, making the killing curse inaccessible, and relying on Limfire was futile. And that was precisely why Voldemort never believed that the task could be accomplished so easily with just 2 half-wits. He must have overlooked someone, or perhaps someone was playing tricks on him. Fudge. Dumbledore. Voldemort's mind conjured up images of both. But intellectually, he leaned more towards the latter, otherwise he wouldn't have believed Barty the Younger and that foolish student could pull it off. As Voldemort pondered this, a gloomy cloud also fell over Hogwarts. The corridors, the Great Hall, everyone remained silent, even the footsteps were quieter than usual. The Gryffindor dormitories were also devoid of their usual bustle. Ginny, tearful, wept in Harry's arms. She could never have imagined that someone she had just chatted with that morning would die in the castle in just a few hours. Everything had happened so suddenly. Slytherin, one of the houses affected. Compared to Gryffindor, the common room beneath the castle was shrouded in an eerie silence. Draco was consumed by anxiety and fear. Crabbe was his lackey, always had been. Crabbe Sr. was also close friends with the Malfoys. Unlike Draco's panic, Daphne's expression was even more complex. Fear, terror, and a hint of disbelief. Daphne glanced cautiously at Pansy, then quickly averted her gaze. She wasn't sure if Pansy was involved, but her upbringing had taught her that when something happened, the first thing to look at was the person who benefited from it. Pansy, undoubtedly, was one of those who benefited. Chapter 363 New Ghost. On the 8th floor of the castle, in the headmaster's office. Albus. What should I do? I took her and her parents to Diagon Alley. I watched her buy a wand. Now, I have to tell her parents that their daughter died at Hogwarts. Unlike her previous attempts at self-control, Professor McGonagall burst into tears upon entering her office. It was she who had introduced Hermione to the magical world, that little brown-haired girl whose smile revealed two rabbit-like front teeth. The innocent smile in her mind now overlapped with the cold expression of her lying in the hospital wing. Albus. Professor McGonagall sobbed. Suddenly, someone on the mural in the headmaster's office spoke. Dumbledore, there are guests outside. They're from Boxburtons and Durmstrang. Should we open the door? Hearing of the foreign guests, Professor McGonagall wiped away her tears. At the same time, in the 8th floor corridor, Karkaroff asked incredulously, can it really be cancelled if the three headmasters agree? I've already said it. The Goblet of Fire is merely an alchemical artifact, and no school possesses a greater reservoir of alchemical knowledge than Boxburtons, Madame Maxime declared firmly. She had no intention of participating in the Goblet of Fire. Hogwarts, and indeed, all of England, made her feel unsafe. She cared more about her students' lives than about their own glory. She wanted to take them back to Boxburtons. But before that, the first thing to do was to extinguish the Goblet of Fire and sever its pact with the champions. She'd expected some deliberation, but Karkaroff's reaction was even more aggressive than hers. He seemed to have been eager to leave for a while, almost eager to flee. As the two guest headmasters conferred, silence fell in the private ward on the 2nd floor of the castle. In the room, less than 10 square meters, the bed had long since vanished, replaced by a coffin clad in blue ice crystal. Hermione lay inside, her face rosy, as if she were asleep. But in reality, Ino knew it was merely a continuous healing spell, a brief, rootless glimmer of life. Sitting beside the coffin, he felt a genuine sense of sadness. Perhaps he shouldn't have gotten involved in other people's stories in the first place. He should have been forced into Hufflepuff, a true spectator. 5 years in the castle, then transfer to Boxburtons. Perhaps everything would be fine. But then he thought of the ending. It seemed that after the first year, this castle was no longer a fairy tale. Sitting beside the coffin, Ino felt a sense of regret, but not despair. Currently, there are two known methods of resurrection, ice flowers and the tower's resurrection magic from the Brothers Grimm stories. This was why he had frozen the body in the first place. But each method had its drawback, being controlled by the mechanisms of the sanctuary, resulting in shared success and failure. Tell me what happened. A calm voice echoed in the room. Unlike the other professors, Snape remained in the room throughout the entire process. After handing out the potion, he remained silent for hours. His sudden words surprised Ino. He knew Snape wasn't one for conversation, so he must have been thinking of something to ask. The sun faded, the moon emerged. The setting sun dipped into the west, the moon cast a silvery glow, and day and night passed in this moment. In the ward, after listening to the entire story, Snape fell into deep silence, sitting there alone. Time seemed to pass for an eternity, yet it also seemed like a moment. Suddenly, Snape stood up and walked out of the ward without a word. Ino didn't take Snape's departure seriously. Although he had warned him, he also felt that this sudden attack was a bit strange. Regardless, the priority was to complete the resurrection ritual perfectly. As for the future, they could settle the accounts later. With Snape's departure, Ino was left alone in the ward. In stark contrast, the headmaster's office was bustling with people. Not only were there two guest headmasters, but also Fudge and Bagman from the Department of Magical Sports and Physical Education. Fudge was there to deal with the students' deaths at the castle, while Bagman was representing the Ministry of Magic and the extinguishing of the Goblet of Fire. Someone needs to be held accountable for this. Upon learning of the student's death, Fudge immediately rushed to make his position clear. The murderer was fourth-year student Vincent Crabbe, but by the time we arrived, he was already dead. Professor McGonagall took over. Really? Then how do you think we can resolve this? Fudge asked tentatively, like a student. Before arriving at Hogwarts, he had already learned some of the details through various channels. The more he knew about this, the more reluctant he was to get involved. However, with such a situation, the Ministry of Magic couldn't just sit on the sidelines. The best solution was to hand over power to Hogwarts, with him, the minister, being forced to act as the executor. That way, whether either side won or lost, he would have room to mediate. But it was clear that Professor McGonagall didn't understand. After being questioned about the execution method, she made her position clear. Brack used the Imperious and killing curses. Someone must have taught him these two spells, and that cannot be ignored. As for Ino. At this point, Professor McGonagall sighed softly. As for Ino, I'll leave it to you. I believe the Ministry of Magic and the Wizengamot will give him a fair trial. Don't. Fudge interrupted decisively. Mr. Swinburne is still a student. Both the Ministry and the Wizengamot must consider Hogwarts' advice. While Fudge and Professor McGonagall were conferring, Bagman, on behalf of the Ministry of Magic in England, agreed to the two guest headmasters' request to cancel the Triwizard Tournament and extinguish the Goblet of Fire. As the true mastermind, Dumbledore remained silent throughout, sitting quietly in his desk, staring blankly at a portrait. The sun disappears and the moon appears, marking the beginning of night. The sun rises and the moon disappears, marking the beginning of day. Time slipped quietly by, and as the castle experienced another cycle of sun and moon, a new day arrived. The first rays of dawn shone upon Hogwarts' tallest astronomy tower, and in a strange surge of magic, the entire castle seemed to come alive. On the second floor of the hospital wing, after a night of quiet contemplation, Ino quietly opened his eyes. A silver ghost appeared before him. This spirit seemed playful, constantly flitting around the ward, sometimes possessing the icy coffin, sometimes gazing at the blooming hyacinths on the windowsill. Hermione. Ino whispered softly. The ghost before him was none other than Hermione, who had died yesterday. Tomorrow, he would enter the world of teacher haunts and, through Andersen's fairy tales, bring Hermione back to life. Finally, the end of the month. Zia Odi, please vote, please vote, please vote. Chapter 364, The best way to use the shelter as a token. Ghosts are the final traces of deceased witches and wizards left in reality. They can continue to speak, walk, and move freely. However, because they choose the most meager means of existence, ghosts cannot enjoy anything, whether delicious food or beautiful decorations. Hermione was now in ghost form, her entire body a translucent pearly white. After hearing the call, Hermione stopped wandering and floated to Ino. You shouldn't have acted so impulsively in the end. Some things have already happened, and he will be punished by the Ministry of Magic. Her voice was a little cold, but the concern in it could not be concealed. Speaking of impulsiveness, you were the most impulsive one. Ino looked up, his eyes also filled with concern, but also a hint of blame. Oh. I didn't think too much about it. It was just the two of us, and you didn't have your wand. Otherwise, I still have the necklace, and you have nothing. In her ghost form, Hermione's cognition seemed to be stuck in the moment before her death. A long moment passed. Ino, can you help me? Hermione lowered her head sadly. Help me release Mom and Dad from the Oblivion charm. I don't want them to be sad. I have a way to bring you back to life. Believe me. Ino interrupted. Although the conditions are strict, even demanding, I can indeed bring you back to life. Resurrection. Hermione looked a little stunned. She had never heard of anyone being resurrected, not even by magic. But after seeing Ino's serious expression and confirming that he was no joke, Hermione's surprise turned to surprise and disbelief. Really? Hermione's voice choked. Most witches and wizards who become ghosts choose to continue in this impoverished state out of reluctance or lack the courage to move on. Now, hearing about resurrection, Hermione felt a deep sense of indescribable emotion. I'm serious. But I have to tell you the demanding conditions in advance. Ino spoke, glancing around. After confirming that the pristine white ward was empty, a shadow began to creep in from beneath his feet. In a split second, the black mist of the bog art enveloped the entire ward. Horizontal ellipsis. Hermione, we first met at Hogwarts, in the Cheltenham College Junior School. With just a few words, time seemed to have returned to the summer of 4 years ago. Hermione drifted quietly by, the scene of that summer seemingly playing out before her eyes, a small stool under the shade of a tree at the school gate, a piece of starched, bleached linen. Magic creates miracles. For many Muggle children, a letter delivered by an owl at 11 is a miracle, but for me, there's another miracle beyond that. In the bog art encased hospital room, Ino recounted the past. Recounting various anecdotes. Old John is irresponsible. He's unworthy of being a father. Hermione angrily expressed her dissatisfaction upon hearing the story of the town. That princess is so pitiful. The story of the tower evoked a feeling of empathy. So, the White Witch was the first person you resurrected. Finally, upon hearing about Lena, Hermione's expression and tone were strange. I didn't resurrect her, she smuggled her out. Ino, facing the sour tone, chose to speak the truth immediately. Smuggled. Hermione's eyes widened. She had only heard of smuggling between countries, but this was the first time she'd heard of smuggling between worlds. Yes. Smuggled. Ino nodded seriously. But it's undeniable that the White Witch did give me a lot of help, and that Ice Flower was the key to this resurrection. Ino spoke slowly, outlining the pros and cons of the sanctuary, even the restrictions after resurrection. The sun gradually rose higher. From dawn to dawn, more than 2 hours passed. The school hospital ward was shrouded in black fog, preventing many from entering. Feeding on fear, the black fog spawned by the bog art would bring back horrific memories for anyone with a weak mind. Fudge was one of those people. Standing outside the school hospital door, Fudge kept wiping the sweat from his forehead with a handkerchief. God knows where he got the sweat in the cold winter. Actually, there's no need for that. Mr. Swinburne has his reasons. Standing at the doorway, the man nominally the most powerful in England seemed flustered. He couldn't express his grievances, that was Fudge's inner state. He'd just come up with a plan, and now he was on the opposing side. He couldn't understand why old McGonagall insisted on a trial. Beside him, Professor McGonagall was equally upset. If possible, she would have given up. But to keep Ino's future clean and avoid criticism, a formality was the right thing to do. This was the so-called final word. With a Ministry of Magic trial, the Wizengamot would be responsible for everything going forward. Besides, the more Fudge acted like this, the more reassured she felt. On the other hand, if Fudge acted harshly, she would have stepped in to stop Ino from being taken away. So, should we just wait here? Or maybe we should wait a few days. Fudge's eyes wandered across the corridor, and as for the black fog that sealed the room, he glanced at it and then stopped. Ino was unaware of what was happening outside. But inside, after he finished speaking, he quietly waited for Hermione's response. Time slipped by in the silence. After a moment, Hermione's voice echoed through the room, "Will you abandon me to another world? Just like her?" How could that be? Ino shook his head decisively. "Although I'll be subject to the sanctuary after resurrection, I've already thought of a solution. We can use magic." Magic? Hermione raised an eyebrow, intrigued. She was delighted, not only because she could be resurrected, but also because she seemed poised to venture with Ino into the place he'd described, the bizarre and fantastical world. But no matter how happy she was, she still had to maintain her proper reserve, at least a little, which led to her earlier question. Meanwhile, Ino, though he hadn't guessed Hermione's thoughts, didn't stop him from expressing his own blood pact. Compared to the unbreakable curse, the blood pact was undoubtedly a form of magic that bridged the gaps between them, a more complex and profound connection. The most obvious point is that it's not just an oath, but a magical bond based on blood and affection. And this is what Ino has come up with as the best way to bridge the gap. I plan to use the sanctuary as a token of the blood pact, making it unbreakable. After explaining the blood pact, Ino also outlined his initial plan. The blood pact is arguably the most profound oath magic in the wizarding world. Its lack of popularity stems from the fact that it possesses a token, making it reversible. Using the sanctuary as a token creates a perfect balance. The sanctuary provides binding control, but above all, the blood pact cannot harm each other. To break the blood pact, one must first find a way to destroy the sanctuary. This is the true unbreakable cycle. In Newt's story, Dumbledore destroyed the token, thereby breaking the blood pact, leading to the subsequent confrontation and fight. Truthfully, it's different from Lena's stowaway. In his first independent resurrection, he hoped Hermione would be independent, not a vassal. Therefore, using a blood pact as a bond and the sanctuary as a token of trust is the best solution. Even if they ever part ways, Hermione will remain the same independent Hermione, unaffected. Under the blood pact's oath, the two will at most become strangers, refraining from interfering with or harming each other. There's no such thing as vassalage or control. Ziodes sharing today, blood pact. Definition: a blood pact is a more complex and profound magical connection. It's more than just a simple oath. but a magical bond based on blood and emotion. It emphasizes thou shalt not attack the other, meaning that the two parties cannot harm each other. Characteristics: while there are no clear consequences for violating a blood pact, it's generally believed to prevent direct harm between the two parties. A blood pact has a token, which can be destroyed, though the process may result in physical or mental damage. A blood pact emphasizes emotional and spiritual mutual restraint and is typically only for close individuals. If you're listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means they downloaded and uploaded it without effort. We cordially invite you to visit our channel, Mundo Fanfic Novelis. There you'll find the original version of this story, and you can explore many other novels of various genres. We're waiting for you to immerse yourself in a world of incredible novels. Chapter 365. Mr. Minister, please do me a favor. The black mist of the Boggart enveloped the entire ward. Inside, Hermione quietly lowered her head upon hearing about the blood pact. Her cheeks felt slightly hot, especially after learning that it was based on a bond of blood and affection. While ghosts don't feel hot, shyness is inevitable. Hermione looked down at her toes, her hands folded over her stomach, and for a moment, she didn't respond. Meanwhile, seeing Hermione's silence, Ino was at a loss for words. The blood pact was his best option. It was a true shared success and shared loss. He couldn't use sanctuary to force Hermione to do something, as that would be a form of harm, and the fundamental oath of a blood pact is not to harm one another. As for the added bond of affection, honestly, the moment Hermione lunged out, much became clear. Last night, after Snape left, Ino had put himself in her shoes. If it had been Hermione lying there, would he have been able to stand before the killing curse? Facing the true answer in his heart, he remained silent. But then came the touching moment. The complexity and changeability of the human heart, like a never-ending kaleidoscope. Sacrifice is always the brightest shining point of human nature. Hermione did it, but he hesitated. And this is why he was willing to use the shelter as a token of his love. Because kindness should always be reciprocated with the same kindness. But for now, Hermione seemed a little conflicted. After a moment's thought, Ino slowly said, "Actually, if you don't want to." "No. I do." Hermione raised her head decisively. At this moment, she no longer cared about being reserved or shy. If she continued to be reserved, who knew what would happen? "Are you sure?" Ino slowly raised his head. "I am sure." Hermione nodded with equal seriousness. "Okay. Leave the rest to me. We still need some preparation." For the first time in a day, Ino's lips curved up. "What about my parents?" Hermione brought up the matter from the beginning again. "Although resurrection is quick. But leave this to me too. I happen to know a wizard skilled in the memory charm," Ino said with a smile, his gaze turning towards the door surrounded by boggarts. Relaxed, he sensed the visitor at the doorway, and there was something he needed to intervene. "Then I'll leave it to you. I need to take this opportunity to experience the ghost life. Oh, and Ginny, I need to go scare her." As he spoke, Hermione passed through the ceiling. After disappearing, she popped her head out again. "By the way, remember to let me know when you're ready." "Of course." Ino nodded slightly, his voice firm. As Hermione left, he reached out and placed his hand on the ice crystal coffin, and his figure vanished at the same moment. On the second-floor corridor, Professor McGonagall and Fudge stood silently outside the ward, neither of them speaking. Just when they thought they would not see Ino that day, the black mist shrouding the door suddenly vanished like a tide. The door opened. "Sorry, Professor. I was just chatting with Hermione." Ino looked at Professor McGonagall. Professor McGonagall's previously calm eyes moistened slightly at that single sentence. "I'm sorry. I haven't done my job as vice headmaster." She took a deep breath, calmed herself, and spoke again. But now Minister Fudge wants to see you." As the words fell, Fudge's eyes widened, and he turned stiffly to look at Professor McGonagall. It was hard to imagine that even such a shrewd politician would one day lose control of his expression. Shock, confusion, bewilderment, betrayal, helplessness, and a hint of grievance and resentment. Fudge felt truly wronged at that moment. What did this have to do with him? He hadn't wanted to come in the first place, yet they had forced him to come. And the result? He said this after he arrived. But now he couldn't say anything, as the student opposite him had already turned his gaze. "It's like this. Mr. Swinburne." Because of Ms. McGonagall's strong request. Unable to avoid it, Fudge immediately and succinctly stated his purpose. I understand. Ino nodded calmly, then continued, but not now, because I have more important things to do. Of course. These are trivial matters. Faced with a rejection, Fudge actually breathed a sigh of relief. You go ahead and do your work. I'll take care of the ministry and the Wizengamot. They can't blame a student for an accident. Our duty is to be fair and impartial. At that moment, Fudge seemed to be radiant. He hadn't forgotten the time when a Muggle-born girl, just 17, was sent to Azkaban for conjuring a flower at her mother's grave. Meanwhile, Professor McGonagall, seeing Ino's resoluteness, said nothing more. Fudge would intervene, and everything would be settled later. But now, a glint of tangible worry flashed in her eyes. Over the decades, she had seen too many wizards driven to extremes by hatred. But at this moment, all she could do was let them have their way. Forcing them to preach would only backfire. Meanwhile, after receiving Fudge's answer, Ino nodded slightly and continued, Okay. Thank you for your understanding, Mr. Minister. But I still need your help with something. Time slipped by quietly as they talked. When Hermione appeared in the castle, in the Gryffindor common room, it caused a stir. This was understandable. While the young wizards were accustomed to seeing ghosts, they only considered them decorative. Suddenly, when someone close to them becomes a ghost, the shock and impact are truly terrifying. In the Gryffindor common room, Ginny looked tearfully at her former friend, a figure floating in midair, a pearly white of deathly stillness. Not only Ginny, but everyone in Gryffindor wore a look of sorrow, and George and Fred were completely devoid of their usual smiles. Harry, Ron, Neville, Dean, Colin, Angelina, even Lavender, who had always been at odds with Hermione, quietly wiped away tears. When Hermione appeared in Gryffindor, in the castle's basement, Snape also took out a sealed box from a shelf in the darkroom. When he opened it, he was surprised to find neatly arranged feathers of the silent bird inside. This material is one of the most important ingredients in making Veritaserum. After hearing what happened last night, he had a sense of déjà vu. How similar this was to Godric's Hollow, the same killing curse, the same fatal blow. This time, he was not going to sit still and wait for death. Magic can be cracked. Legilimency cannot compete with Occlumency, and even some oath magic can counter Legilimency. Compared to magic, Veritaserum has no way to be cracked so far. Moreover, the Veritaserum he was going to brew now had actually been refined for 14 years. Chapter 366, Seaside City, Teacher Haunts. Far from mainland England, amidst the vast blue ocean, lies a rocky island seemingly forgotten by time. Though small, its skies are perpetually overcast, devoid of sunlight. A gloomy sky, shrouded in leaden clouds, thick and heavy, blocks out all light, leaving this already desolate island devoid of any warmth or brightness. Azkaban. This prison, the very thing that scares wizards, stands upon the island. In the light punishment wing, Lockhart huddled in a corner of the cell, staring numbly at the gloomy sky. He has been here for exactly 1 year and 175 days. From his initial fantasies of being rescued by his fans, to his gradual realization of his situation, to his current numbness, he has undergone so many transformations. He feels the biting sea breeze from afar, and hears the crash of waves against the rocks. Loneliness is the eternal leitmotif of Azkaban. Lockhart leaned against the cold wall. For the first time, he felt regret. His former fame, his glory, even the flashes of his cameras, the things he once cared about most now seemed utterly hazy. Instead, every detail of his school days in Ravenclaw Tower came vividly to mind. Every class, every moment, even the arguments with Rita, were all crystal clear. He silently calculated the time, and once he felt the Dementors were gone, Lockhart turned on his memory mode again. The old scenes replayed themselves, as if he were back at Hogwarts. Today, he was back in a charms class from his second year. From a third-person perspective, he could clearly watch Professor Flitwick on the podium as he practiced a freezing spell. Like the young wizard below, he copied the lesson bit by bit. He didn't know how many times this had happened, but in Azkaban, he could only attend class over and over again, review lessons over and over again, reliving the ordinary and warm moments he once took for granted. Freeze. The already cold and silent cell suddenly grew even colder, and the source of this chill was the opposite wall, where Lockhart pointed his finger. As the spell fell, a 2-foot-wide patch of frost suddenly appeared on the opposite wall. Wandless spellcasting. In the past, he would have demonstrated it to everyone at the right opportunity. But now, he just wanted to find a stable job after his sentence was over, and enjoy the ordinary life he once took for granted. If possible, he also needed to apologize to Rita, a belated apology. Tap tap, tap. Suddenly, the sound of footsteps disturbed the silence of Azkaban. Feeling the footsteps coming his way, Lockhart raised his head slightly. His once flowing blonde hair was now tangled, but his eyes were now bright. Gerald Lockhart. Your good fortune has come, the striker, in charge of the guards, said from a distance. Accompanied by 2 strikers, Lockhart looked back at Azkaban, a world away. Don't be dazed. Do this well, and the minister might be able to reduce your sentence. The striker beside him spoke in a soothing voice. He had seen this scene many times. Everyone who left Azkaban looked like this. Just make 2 muggles forget their daughter. Although he already knew his mission, Lockhart reiterated. Not just forget, but temporarily. And there must be no damage, and it must be fully restored by then, the striker instructed again, emphasizing the final condition. He understood the importance of this mission. If he failed, no one would suffer. I understand. Lockhart nodded silently after receiving a positive answer. After 1.5 years in prison, the Oblivion charm had been engraved in his soul. Time flowed like water. 2 days passed in a flash. With Madame Pance's hesitant expression, Ino borrowed several books about the Blood Pact. For the past 2 days, he had mostly stayed in his former ward, living a secluded life. He called the suitcases in the dormitory, as well as Fighty and Crib who were wandering outside, to his side. In the 10-square-meter ward. After packing everything, Ino picked up the suitcases again, 1 red and 1 blue, and 2 phoenixes were also placed on his shoulders. I have to leave. Lockhart has already taken care of your parents' side. Don't worry. There won't be any damage. Don't I need to go with you? Hermione spoke slowly in midair. I'd like to think so, but the truth is, you really can't go right now. Ino shook his head slightly. Although Hermione had become a ghost, he wasn't sure if Asylum would accept her, otherwise Voldemort's Horcruxes would be an example. Of course, if Crabbe had become a ghost as well, that would be perfect for experimentation. But unfortunately, perhaps because he was the murderer, the castle didn't accept Crabbe. As for other innocent ghosts, he really couldn't bring them in for experiments. Trust me. It'll be quick, Ino promised. In the story world and the magical world, time always flows in an instant. Yes. I believe you, Hermione nodded seriously. After a brief farewell, under Hermione's gaze, Ino took out the irregular dice and crushed it with force. Under the morning sun, by the seashore. At that moment, fishermen were busy shuttling around the docks. They were dressed in linen clothes and hats, some mending their nets, some tidying up their boats. Although their clothes were simple, each of them had a satisfied smile on his face. Looking past a fisherman on the dock, behind them stretched the endless city walls. Though the ancient stone walls, eroded by the sea wind, had become mottled and even covered with moss, they still stood firm, like the most loyal guardian. This was a coastal city. Ino stood still, quietly surveying his surroundings. The 2 phoenixes in Hermione's coffin were both placed in his suitcase. After a brief moment of adjustment, Ino looked towards a nearby bitter orange tree. Beneath it sat a barefoot, blonde, middle-aged man. He wore a loose, plain robe and held a 2-foot-long winged harp. He leaned against the tree trunk, strumming his harp while slowly gazing out at the vast ocean. Though his appearance might seem ordinary, his clear, piercing eyes, tinged with a touch of melancholy, were unforgettable. Perhaps sensing something, the middle-aged man slowly turned his head as Ino looked at him. You've grown taller. How have you been these past few years? When the calm voice, like the gentle breeze, rang out again, Ino felt a long-lost sense of peace. Not really. But I'm happy to see you again, Mr. Hans. Chapter 367 The Golden Apple and the Resurrection of Hermione. The seaside scenery was beautiful, with endless golden beaches, the fine sands gleaming with a unique sheen in the sun. Waves crashed against the shore, creating a rhythmic sound, like the ocean whispering to the coastal city. In the distance, the sea and sky merged into one. The azure sky and the turquoise water intertwined, and at first glance, it was impossible to tell whether the sky reflected the ocean, or the ocean hung in the sky. Beneath the bitterling tree. After hearing Ino's answer, middle-aged Hans frowned slightly. his melancholy expression becoming more pronounced. Miraculously, as he frowned, the sound of the waves across the ocean gradually subsided, and the wind lost its force. "Isn't it good? You can stay here if you like," middle-aged Hans said after a while. "Ah." Ino sighed softly. "If you could have said that the first time we met, I might have stayed. But now, it's a little too late." "Ha ha ha. Time is never important," middle-aged Hans chuckled, continuing the conversation as he plucked his wing-shaped harp again. "Age slowly wears away only the skin, passion abandoned, decadence inevitably takes over the soul. It's all right, child. Everything will be fine." The familiar tone, the familiar melody, made Ino completely relax. He removed his boots and stepped barefoot onto the beach, using his suitcase as a pillow as he leisurely lay down beneath the bitter orange tree. Meanwhile, middle-aged Hans gently plucked the strings of his harp, a distant sound echoing with the waves. A flock of pure white seagulls flew overhead, their cries fittingly across the azure sky. Everything seemed so beautiful. In this atmosphere, Ino gradually closed his eyes. The chilliness that had once graced his expression due to the ice magic vanished in that moment. His hair, previously lightened, once again shone with a jet-black sheen. As the morning sun gave way to the blazing sun, and the blazing sun gave way to dusk, the day ended. At dusk, the fishermen who had gone out to sea in the morning returned one after another, sharing their experiences with their families waiting at the dock. Whether the harvest was good or bad, the smiles on their faces remained constant. They returned home safely. The clamor in his ears caused Ino to slowly open his eyes. "Awake? If you sleep any more, we'll miss dinner," smiled the middle-aged Hans. "Sorry, teacher." Ino supported himself with his arms and slowly sat up. His gaze, like Hans's, now followed the returning fishing boats. In the dusk, the two of them watched the busy fishermen in the distance in silence. For a long moment, "Teacher, a friend of mine has unfortunately passed away," Ino began slowly, stating the purpose of his journey. To be honest, while the ice flower could revive someone, he didn't know the specific steps, and the path to Middle-earth, where Lena resided, was not open at this time. Delays can lead to unexpected consequences. To expedite his resurrection, he sought out his former mentor, hoping his knowledge would be of assistance. Meanwhile, upon hearing of the tragic death, middle-aged Hans remained calm, continuing the conversation. "It's truly a pity. But since she's dead, let's bring her back to life." With this, he turned his head slightly, no longer looking at the distant fisherman. "I remember you were curious about that golden apple tree. As it happens, they'll be ripe in a few days." Perhaps it was an illusion, but Ino felt a strange lingering quality after Teacher Hans's words. Just as he was about to mention the ice flowers, he saw Teacher Hans slowly stand. "I'll buy us dinner. Dead fish will be cheap." At dusk, middle-aged Hans pulled a few copper coins from his pocket and leisurely walked barefoot towards the dock. He left his winged harp, which he always carried with him, behind it. Evening. A gentle sea breeze blew. A bonfire quietly lit on a quiet beach. Middle-aged Hans focused on grilling fish, while Ino arranged the candies on a plate. These candies were gifts he'd received during Christmas. Because of the Voldemort incident, he hadn't immediately shared them with others, leaving them piled up in his dorm. Before entering the story, he simply stuffed them all into his suitcase. After arranging the last piece of candied pineapple, Ino looked up and asked in confusion, "Teacher, can the golden apple bring back the dead?" "Of course," middle-aged Hans asked. After a moment, he added, "In my opinion, this is the best way to resurrect, bar none. Just stay here and relax. In a few days, Miss Swallow will bring the golden apple." Honestly, Ino didn't know what to do. Such a precious thing, delivered right to his door. He didn't know what to say. Perhaps sensing Ino's distress, middle-aged Hans slowly spoke, "Don't worry about it. The golden apples are meant to save lives. Besides, no one else can take them. However, Miss Swallow ran errands for him, so I need to repay her favor." Hearing this, Ino remained silent. He had already received enough favors from Teacher Hans. A single roll of the divination dice had helped him secure food and clothing in his difficult times. But the only thing that puzzled him was that everything in this world must have a cause. While it sounded harsh, the truth was, nothing good happened without a reason. Confused by this, Ino accepted the grilled fish offered by Teacher Hans. Time flew by, like an arrow. Life by the sea was always pleasant. 7 whole days passed in a flash. On the morning of the 7th day, Ino watched the fisherman busily heading out to sea. He turned and picked up his accordion, preparing to go to the city with teacher Hans to tell stories and earn a living. But today, even after all the fishing boats on the sea had drifted away, middle-aged Hans remained unmoved, sitting beneath a bitter orange tree. Teacher. SHH. Look over there. Middle-aged Hans gestured for silence, pointing towards the horizon. A shimmer of gold drifted from the distant sky against the azure blue. In a flash, a beautiful swift appeared before them, its slender beak clutching a golden apple nearly as long as its body. Phew. I'm so tired. The swift gently lowered the apple and began to speak, its clear voice like a vibrant young girl. You want the golden apple, Mr. Black Swan. Oh. The word Black Swan left Ino stunned. What? You don't want it? Then I'll take it. The swift, seemingly impatient, flapped its wings as if to leave. Don't go, I want it. Seeing teacher Hans playing dumb, Ino responded decisively. That's easy. You have to do me a favor. Swift suddenly said with a smile, I'll give you the golden apple, but you have to help me take care of a little duck. No. To be more precise, she's a swan like you, but she's so pitiful right now. The moment Ino took the golden apple. Far away in the Hogwarts Great Hall, a farewell dinner was being held. The goblet of fire had gone out, and tomorrow morning, Buttons and Durmstrang would also leave. Hermione flew around the hallboard. Ino had said it would be quick. But she had already waited a whole week, during which time she had learned about the suffering of ghosts. Looking at the table full of sumptuous dishes, she could only watch. Now she really wanted a large glass of honey lemonade, the sour and sweet taste. Thinking about it. Suddenly, Hermione noticed that the hall had grown quiet. Looking around, she saw that everyone in the hall, including the professors in the guest seats, was looking at her. Hermione slowly raised her hand. Unknowingly, her palm was no longer a pearly white, but now a golden glow. Not just her arm, but her entire body was radiating a golden glow. This light was dazzling, brilliant, yet incredibly gentle. Gradually, Hermione felt her body grow lighter and lighter, and her senses, which had been lost, began to return. She could smell the moist sea breeze and the sweet aroma of the great whole cake. Under the gaze of everyone in the castle, Hermione's body soared higher and higher, like a golden meteor, soaring alone into the vast night sky. Ziodes sharing today, Blood Pact. Definition: a blood pact is a more complex and profound magical connection. It's more than a simple oath, but a magical bond based on blood and emotion. It emphasizes thou shalt not attack the other, meaning that the two parties cannot harm each other. Characteristics: while there are no clear consequences for violating a blood pact, it is generally believed to prevent direct harm between the two parties. A blood pact has a token, which can be destroyed, though the process may result in physical or mental damage. Blood covenants place more emphasis on emotional and spiritual mutual restraint, and are usually only formed between two people with a close relationship. Chapter 368 Golden Meteor, Hogwarts topic. If you ask what magic truly is, I imagine no one truly knows. But if you ask what magic can achieve, the answers are bound to be myriad. Perhaps it's the ability to transform into something you wish for, perhaps the ability to travel the world with a fleeting movement, or perhaps even the freedom to fly on a broomstick. But no matter the answer, there's no resurrection from the dead. Hogwarts Great Hall. Students from Buttons, Durmstrang, and Hogwarts gathered. The dinner began, and while it should have been bustling with activity, the Great Hall was utterly silent. As everyone watched, Hermione Granger's ghost suddenly transformed into a brilliant golden halo, a dazzling glow like a rising sun, eclipsing the candles floating in the Great Hall. Illuminated by this light, everyone felt a genuine joy. But as Hermione's figure vanished into the distant night sky, the stillness of the Great Hall was abruptly broken. The ghost changed color and flew away. Not only the young wizards, but even many of the older professors had never seen it before. The guests in the main hall had mixed expressions. Professor McGonagall covered her mouth and sobbed softly. Professor Flitwick seemed lost in thought. Snape and Dumbledore stared up at the sky, their gaze is almost tangible. The professors all reacted in this way, not to mention the young wizards. Those who weren't familiar with Hermione offered objective comments and discussions, while those who knew her best, like Ginny, burst into tears. She had heard the nearly headless Nico next to her, grumbling that she might never see Hermione again as a ghost. That's a good thing. Nico, floating in midair, babbled with a tone bordering on envy. "She's brave," she went on. "Even if it was only for a week. She's brave," she went on. As Gryffindore's resident ghost, Nico had centuries of experience. While he hadn't witnessed much, he had at least heard about it. Ghosts always vanish because those who stop by let go, finding the courage to move on. What almost headless knew, the other ghosts also knew. Following the castle's explanations, many immediately offered Hermione silent blessings. It's conceivable that even years later, there will still be people who remember today's events and relish their stories. Stories, it seems, all begin with people spreading and relishing them. The Scottish Highlands night was beautiful. All was silent, save for a glimpse of stars. Like lost gems, set in the depths of the sky. Hermione didn't know how long she'd been flying, but the once majestic castle seemed to shrink. At first, she could make out its outline, but now, only a last glimmer of orange light could be seen on the ground. Perhaps it was the glow of the fireplace and candles, cast through the windows. Or perhaps it was like tiny fireflies on the ground, echoing the stars in the night sky. Thinking of the stars, Hermione raised her head again. For the first time, she clearly saw that the distant, unreachable stars she had once seen in astronomy class now seemed within reach. Hermione flew through the sky for an unknown amount of time. Just as she was growing bored, a star suddenly glowed brightly, and she closed her eyes in a trance. On the shore, far from the hustle and bustle of the city, 3 miles from the bustling docks and the shimmering lights of the city, lay a quiet and simple fishing village. With the first light of dawn, the fishermen had gone out to sea, leaving the village somewhat deserted. Only children and the elderly remained. On the outskirts of the village, a simple cottage, carved by time, stood quietly, as if in a corner forgotten by time. Sunlight filtered through the sparse clouds, dappled into the empty room, adding a touch of warmth to the tranquility. Inside, light and shadow intertwined, creating a series of paintings of light and shadow that made one slow down and immerse oneself in the stillness. The room was sparsely furnished, its furnishings simple yet tidy. A few old pieces of furniture sat quietly, telling stories of the past. An old wooden table, worn yet sturdy, seemed to bear the weight of time. A few bamboo chairs, light and practical, nothing else. But today, the empty room was graced with another object that didn't quite match the surrounding decor. An ice-blue coffin, resembling crystal, sat quietly in the center of the room. Beside the coffin, Ino held a golden apple and gently placed it on Hermione's chest. The moment the golden apple touched Hermione, it slowly melted, like liquid, coating the coffin with a faint golden glow. In a corner of the room, middle-aged Hans sat upright on a bamboo chair, half-closed eyes, gazing out the window. The window was half open, facing the boundless ocean. The sea breeze blew through the room, bringing a hint of salty, refreshing air. Outside, the familiar sea lay. Now, in the empty room, only the sound of the sea breeze and waves accompanied them, bringing an unprecedented sense of peace and tranquility. Suddenly, a faint voice echoed from within the coffin, "I'd like some honey lemonade." Hermione slowly opened her eyes, the dazzling starlight dazzling them for a moment. After a brief moment of adjustment, she saw a face from deep within her memory. Ino. As Hermione opened her eyes, middle-aged Hans's half-closed eyes also suddenly opened. He then leisurely stood up and walked towards the sea, as if leaving them room to talk. Half an hour later. In the empty room, Hermione held a glass of pale yellow honey lemonade, her eyes curiously surveying her surroundings. Although the furnishings were simple, the physical touch of the water brought her a strange sense of satisfaction. A moment later, as the glass of honey lemonade was empty, Hermione slowly set it down. "Is this the other world you were talking about?" "Yes." Ino nodded with a sigh. "A world of miracles." Hermione's resurrection brought a heartfelt sigh of admiration. The ultimate dilemma plaguing the wizarding world, resurrection from the dead, was simply solved with a swallow bringing a golden apple. Calling it a miracle was truly no exaggeration. "It is a miracle," Hermione said with deep sympathy. No one understood the suffering of ghosthood better than she did. The first 2 days were merely a novelty, but the rest of the time was an endless torment. Wandering the castle each day was like an outsider, observing the bustle and bustle. But, no matter how you looked at it, the bustle was always that of the living, while the ghosts possessed only the deadly loneliness. Hermione found it hard to imagine what these ghosts, like those who had nearly lost their heads, had been going through, wandering the castle for hundreds, even thousands of years. Thinking of this, out of empathy, Hermione tentatively asked again, I know, those ghosts. There's nothing we can do. Seeing Hermione's expression, he knew what she was trying to say. Rules are universal. Miracles are just accidental exceptions, not universal. Chapter 369 The Lost World, like a fairy tale. Perhaps it was a sudden resurrection. After a brief period of adjustment and a few candies, Hermione gradually relaxed, no longer as excited as before. Along the coast, the golden, shimmering sand was still breathtakingly beautiful. Hermione rolled up her trouser legs and stepped barefoot on the waves, occasionally bending down to pick up the sea's gift, a dazzling array of shells. Beneath the bitterling tree, Ino glanced at Hermione from afar, then turned his gaze to his side. Teacher Hans. Thank you so much for this. He hadn't expected the golden apple. He had only come to learn how to use the ice flower, but who would have thought he'd even saved it? It's nothing. Everything was destined long ago. The middle-aged Hans said calmly, his tone as casual as ever. Ino was no stranger to such statements from a professional bard and fortune-teller, after all, he always did. But today, there were things he wanted to ask about. He had a feeling that if he missed this opportunity, they might never meet again. Teacher. Honestly, this makes me a little confused. Beneath the tree, Ino gazed out toward the sea again, calmly asking the question that had always puzzled him. It was about his own miracle. On his 10th birthday, he pushed open the door to the orphanage bathroom and stumbled into a fantasy world, where he stumbled upon the middle-aged Hans, who was telling a story. It was normal to say he hadn't given much thought at first. But now, with so many things connected, anyone with a bit of common sense would notice the differences hidden in the details. His first entry, his first encounter with the people, even the dice that allowed him to enter the story world directly from the castle without going through the shelter. He hadn't thought much about it before, treating it as a life-saving tool. But now, with Hermione's casual resurrection, everything was clearly revealed. Even a legendary figure like the White Witch, who destroyed the world, ruled Narnia, and even vaguely opposed the so-called creator lion, ended up sending out a seed. And even that, in a roundabout way, was sent secretly. After voicing his inner doubts, Ino leaned against the tree trunk, quietly waiting. A long while passed. Before you leave, I'll give you the answer, the middle-aged Hans said, his tone more serious than usual. But before that, you still need to help Miss Swallow. After all, it was she who picked the apples. It didn't seem like a direct answer, but Ino felt a sense of relief at the answer. All that mattered was an answer. After all, nothing was more frightening than the unknown. Prophets and seers were revered precisely because they could glimpse the future. Now that he had the answer, Ino no longer fretted about the timeline. After all these years, waiting a little longer seemed insignificant. In the evening, the simple room became lively. Hermione and Swift chatted, their clear, bell-like laughter punctuating the air. Ino sat nearby, quietly preparing the fresh seafood he had just bought. Although somewhat surprised by why Teacher Hans had chosen to settle in such a fishing village, he didn't ask further questions. A bard might seem homeless, but that's only in the grand scheme of things. Often, they'll stop for a short break, settle down in one place for a short period. Regardless, it's a choice. After dinner, Ino opened the suitcase he'd brought with him. He hadn't used it before, but he was used to sleeping outdoors. Now, with one more person, there was no way he could have Hermione sleeping on the floor with him. The suitcase he'd brought was no longer the one used to house acromentulas, but a box Nico had given him, made from the skin of a Potter warthog. The hides of magical creatures inherently hold magical properties, so even with the extension charm expanding the area by hundreds of square meters, the overall structure remained remarkably stable. Dawn broke. A swift soared freely in the azure sky. Behind it, an inky black swan hovered in the distance, and beyond that, a 3-foot-long flying carpet. Hermione, clutching her suitcase, sat on the undulating carpet. Although she'd taken flying lessons at Hogwarts, the carpet felt like the freedom of flight she'd never experienced before. As for the flying broomstick, it was more like riding a bicycle in the air. Sitting on the flying carpet, Hermione looked at the swifts and swans ahead with a hint of envy. If possible, she would rather fly without props. When I get back, I'll learn Animagus. Hermione made a silent resolution. Unlike Hermione's envy, Ino in the sky was calculating the time frame of this story. From yesterday's conversation, He knew that perhaps the different method of entry, or perhaps some other factor, had caused the flow of time to be the same on both sides. After all, Hermione's immediate desire for a sweet and sour drink after her resurrection was telling. Furthermore, from their subsequent conversation, he learned that a week had actually passed in the castle, and the goblet of fire had been forcibly extinguished. However, he didn't care about any of this. What really concerned him was Voldemort, Barty the Younger, and those who might be behind the scenes fanning the flames. It was like he owed the Swifts a favor that needed to be repaid. Some people owed debts that needed to be settled, but ultimately, only when they were still alive could such a settlement be made, otherwise, even becoming a ghost would be pointless. As he thought about this, Ino flapped his wings as hard as he could to avoid slowing down. Swans aren't slow, reaching a maximum speed of 100 kilometers per hour. And swifts, the elite of birds, can reach speeds of up to 350 kilometers per hour. Therefore, he had to fly at full speed to avoid falling behind. As for the flying carpet he bought during the World Cup, it was similar to a broomstick. Perhaps for sales reasons, it was designed purely for single use, not capable of carrying multiple people when unfolded, as described in the 1001 Nights. In the sky, he couldn't tell how much time had passed. Flying at high speed, Ino vaguely remembered passing many cities and crossing mountains. Finally, before dusk, the Swift gradually slowed down. As it slowed, Ino could see clearly what kind of place he had arrived at. Honestly, the sight before him was a bit shocking. The sky was as clear and translucent as a washed sapphire. A few white clouds drifted leisurely, their shapes varied, sometimes gathering in groups, weaving dreamy patterns, sometimes spreading out like light feathers. Sunlight filtered through the clouds, casting dappled shadows and light, draping the earth in a warm and soft golden veil. This was only the sky, but the scenery on earth was no less impressive. As if meticulously crafted by nature, the land was filled with birdsong and flowers, teeming with life. Colorful birds hopped happily from branch to branch, foxes scurried, rabbits leaped, civet cats groomed their fur, and countless other small animals. Not far away, a crystal-clear river meandered, its waters shimmering silver in the sunlight, like a silver ribbon inlaid on a green brocade. Occasionally, a fallen leaf drifted gently across the river, or a few leisurely waterfowl schemed across the surface, creating delicate ripples. But the most striking sight was the graceful frolicking of white swans in the center of the river, and the ducks paddling along the edge. Here, there seemed to be no noise or disturbance, only tranquility and harmony. Every detail revealed the wonders of nature's uncanny craftsmanship and its unforced creation. Soaring in midair, Ino felt as if he had entered some distant, dreamlike corner. It was like a world hidden in an ancient fairy tale, a world that had suddenly leaped forth. We're there. The clear call of a Swift echoed. At the same moment, Ino heard a scream from behind him. Oh my God! How could this happen? Hermione's cry made him turn suddenly. He glanced away, but there was no Hermione on the flying carpet. Instead, atop the 3-foot carpet sat a silver and gray sea otter. The tiny otter held its head in its hands, a look of surprise and disbelief on its face. Chapter 370 The Animal World, The Ugly Duckling and Miss Sea Otter. If I were you, I wouldn't make such a fuss, Miss Otter. A Swift's voice echoed through the air, its clear voice as always. Hermione sat upright on the flying carpet, staring at the two tiny silver-gray paws, at a loss for words. She knew about sea otters, she'd seen them at the London Oceanarium. While she loved these adorable creatures, that didn't mean she wanted to become one. If she truly had to become an animal. Hermione's gaze drifted to the elegant, pure white swans gliding across the river. It's okay. This should only be temporary. Ino flapped her wings, flew over to Hermione, and gently pecked the otter's head with her long swan beak. Feeling the touch, Hermione tilted her head 45 degrees. Her pure black eyes, silver-gray fur, and two helpless paws made her look incredibly adorable. If possible, you should complete the instructions. It's about that little spot down there. A clear voice echoed, and the Swift flew over. Following its gaze, Ino spotted the scenery hidden beneath the river. Horizontal ellipsis. It seemed as if even animals had a hierarchy. In the center of the river, a flock of graceful swans floated. Not far from the river's edge, in a patch of burdock, a flock of ducks frolicked in the water. At a glance, they looked densely packed, at least dozens. On the outskirts of this flock, a smaller group, like yellow croakers, glided along the edge, never daring to approach the central flock. Leading this outer flock was an adult duck with a green neck and brown back feathers, unmistakably the mother duck. Behind it, a flock of black and gray ducklings. Of course, behind these ducklings, there was also a nearly adult duck. Despite its large size, its feathers were nearly grayish-white, giving it the appearance of an overfed child. "Look, this is how the world works," said the mother duck. "But I must warn you, if any of you encounter Mrs. Reese in the middle, be sure to bow your heads. She's the most famous person in our area. She wears a red cloth tied around her leg, the greatest honor a duck can receive." All the ducklings nodded in response to their mother's instructions, including the larger one at the end. The ducklings' responses seemed a bit noisy, attracting the attention of the other ducks. "Look! Another group of guests looking for food. PSSST, this duck is so ugly." A half-grown young duck pecked the duckling harshly. As if this was a signal, the other ducks began to take action, either pecking or hovering around, making sarcastic remarks. "Please leave her alone. She's not hurting anyone." The mother duck could only stand in front. Despite her efforts to explain, the crowd of onlookers was too numerous. "But she's so ugly. She's the ugly duckling. She's different from us, that's her fault. She's so rough, she deserves a beating." The ugly duckling hid behind her mother, bewildered by the taunts around her, feeling the occasional pain. She couldn't figure out what she had done wrong. From the moment she emerged from the eggshell, she'd been beaten, ostracized, and ridiculed. The ugly duckling sank into a deep well of self-blame and doubt, unable to understand what she had done wrong to deserve such treatment. Was it really true that being different was wrong? Faced with the accusations and attacks, the ugly duckling hid its head under its wings, floating quietly on the water, motionless. "Enough. That's enough." An angry voice rang out. All the ducks, including the ugly duckling and its mother, looked across the river. A silver-gray sea otter appeared on the surface. At 1.5 feet, it might seem small, but for a duck, it was a behemoth, at least 2 or 3 times larger than the others. Hermione was furious. She'd read the story of the ugly duckling, but she'd never imagined the bullying depicted so lightly in the book would be so real. Looking at the bewildered duckling, she seemed to see herself in the past. When she first arrived at Hogwarts, she'd faced much the same kind of ostracism. The reason was ridiculous, simply because she was different. She loved studying, getting extra credit, answering the professor's questions. "In my opinion, the ugly duckling is prettier than all of you combined." Hermione's voice echoed over the river. Unlike the other duck sphere, the ugly duckling's eyes gleamed with an unprecedented brilliance. Seeing the ugly duckling's expression, Hermione's lips curved slightly. She had now placed herself in Ino's shoes, and the ugly duckling was her former self. Similarly, she had found the answer. Perhaps, back then, in front of the library, it was just like this. From that moment on, unnoticed, the former trickster quietly transformed into Ino. In the sky. After Hermione plunged into the water with a splash, Ino quietly gazed at the river. "You saw it. It's true. The little swan is always bullied. This isn't the first time," the swift said, gliding in circles. "After all, though swifts fly fast, it's difficult for them to stay airborne. Leave the rest to me." "No. Leave it to Miss Otter. No one can do it better than her." Ino turned around and spoke calmly. "Everything is meaningless, but everything has its meaning." Ino couldn't help but remember what Teacher Hans had said. He immediately understood why he had traveled so far to care for a little swan. This must be Teacher Hans's way of making amends for Hermione, perhaps starting from the moment of the golden apple. Although he couldn't believe, emotionally or rationally, that Teacher Hans would harm an innocent person, the accident had already happened, and it was impossible to say that he didn't have any resentment. Just like the young Grimm brothers, who, though well-intentioned, ultimately betrayed him. If the Grimm brothers hadn't already written the ending, Ino suspected he wouldn't have survived the tower's self-inflicted fire. Under a clear blue sky, a black swan soared. He quietly gazed at the river, where a sea otter and a flock of ducks were arguing. Soon, the scene shifted. Perhaps the sea otter hadn't won the argument, or perhaps she was no longer content with the argument. She swung her paws and charged at the ducks, her actions making her point. Although Hermione had the advantage in size, she had to protect the ugly duckling behind her while also dealing with the sheer number of ducks. Most importantly, she wasn't yet fully accustomed to her own sea otter body. Gradually, Hermione fell behind. Once, twice, 3 times. The ducks pecked at her, but the courage of a Gryffindor was evident. Little by little, the sea otter seemed to take on the shape of a lion. A young lioness's first hunt on the grasslands, her first battle against a pack of hyenas. But being alone is still being alone. As more and more ducks joined, Hermione began to grow weary. Then, Ino knew it was time to enter the fray. A 3-foot black swan flapped its wings, its jet-black feathers gleaming darkly in the sunlight, a multicolored black. Yes, multicolored, just like a crow's. Animal vision is always different from ours. Chapter 371, The Passage of Time, Hermione's Transformation. Night fell. The bright moon hung high in the sky, casting a gentle glow. The calm river seemed shrouded in a thin, silver veil, casting a dreamy, mysterious light upon the waters. A gentle breeze rustled, bringing with it a cool, delicate fragrance. It was the scent of reeds, burdock, morning glories, and blossoming cosmos flowers. The vegetation lining the river swayed in the breeze, rustling in a true natural symphony. Horizontal ellipsis. On the riverbank, beneath a dense patch of reeds, an elegant black swan rested peacefully on a haystack. Beside it, a small, beautifully silver-gray sea otter slept. Hermione lay on the haystack, feeling the warmth and gentleness around her. Though her eyes were closed, she recalled the past few days, from the moment before her death to her rebirth, scene after scene. It all seemed unreal to her, even though it was happening. But today, after a huge argument and even a brawl with the ducks, Hermione finally felt the reality. It was the feeling of being alive, not a dream that could be easily awakened. Lying on the haystack, the sea otter quietly reached out its tiny paw and gently touched the soft feathers of the black swan beside it, gradually drifting off to sleep. Dawn. The rising sun rose. Its brilliant, soft golden light illuminated the magical world, and the animals opened their sleepy eyes. Of course, except for Mr. Owl, who was now preparing to retreat to his burrow for a good night's sleep. The quiet lake of the night was bustling again, the swans occupying the prime central spot, while the ducks still lingered in the less conspicuous corners. But today, something was different. A pure black swan, accompanied by a tiny sea otter, swam casually in the lake. Ino, what do you think Odette usually eats? Or rather, what do swans eat? She's always hungry, Hermione asked curiously, paddling in the water. Odette was the name she'd given the ugly duckling, after the princess who represented the white swan in the ballet Swan Lake. I don't know what Odette eats, but I do know what swans eat. A sweet, elegant female voice echoed. Hermione swiftly turned her head, only to be met with a remarkably beautiful white swan. Her feathers were as fluffy as snow, her beak was a vibrant red like a blooming rose, and her curvaceous neck was proud and graceful. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to eavesdrop on your conversation. But they said yesterday that a handsome black swan had arrived in this river, so I wanted to come visit. Oh. And Miss Sea Otter, I'm sorry I didn't notice you earlier. I hope you won't be mad. The white swan's sweet voice echoed, but somehow, Hermione remembered the black tea served at breakfast in the castle. I'm not mad. But I don't like being disturbed either. Hermione said, turning her little head to look at Ino. Sea otters, ranked the 5th cutest animal in the world, are truly adorable with their tilted heads. As you can see, my friend doesn't like to be disturbed. Ino extended his wing and stroked Miss Otter's head. Naturally, the two of them changed direction and swam towards the other side of the river. Swans are omnivores. They usually feed on small fish, clams, and of course, water plants and berries. Ino explained to Hermione from the surface. Then let's go ashore and pick some fruit for Odette. Hermione looked at the lush forest on the shore, a flicker of longing in her eyes. Okay. Ino readily agreed to the suggestion. He also wanted to see the inhabitants of the forest. When it comes to stories about animals and anthropomorphism, nothing can compare to Andersen's fairy tales. The ugly duckling, the elderberry mother, the rose fairy, the princess and the pea, the nightingale, the old street lamp, even a real phoenix. There are so many, too many to count. Swans, as one of the most unique animals in fairy tales. Although they can sometimes appear arrogant, they seem to never be portrayed in a negative light, not even in the story of the ugly duckling. When the ugly duckling encountered the swan, it was only gently dissuaded from it, without mocking or attacking it. However, the swan's life cycle is longer than many aquatic birds. Depending on the species, it generally takes 18 to 24 months for a chick to mature, or at least a year and a half. But speaking of time, perhaps in the tranquil animal world, it's the least noticeable. Whenever Miss Cicada and Mr. Cricket play their melody together, the animals know summer is fading. Autumn has arrived. The forest path is no longer as lush and green as it once was. The fallen leaves have transformed it into golden carpet, a soft, rustling sound beneath your feet. Flaming maple leaves, golden ginkgo trees, only the upright pines and cypresses remain lush and green. In the woods, an aquatic sea odor mingled with the squirrels, sharing freshly gathered nuts. The scene seemed a little strange, but within it, it felt perfectly harmonious. Ino quietly watched Hermione interact with the squirrels. Before they knew it, they had already been living in the forest for over half a year. From the blooming spring to the joyful autumn of harvest, the tranquility of life had made him reluctant to leave. He, too, understood Mr. Haunce's intention. Coming here wasn't just to help Hermione, but also to help himself. For over 6 months, he'd lived like a swan. Not only had he not used any magic, he hadn't even opened his traceless extension suitcase. Yet, even so, his physical strength and magical power seemed to be nourished, not only rapidly growing but also constantly purifying and accumulating. In the forest, feeling the harvest and vitality of autumn, a smile crept onto Ino's face. He hadn't noticed it, but now, compared to before, he was smiling more and more. The cool aura brought by the ice magic had long since dissipated. Of course, this was only a change in temperament. It had no effect on his bloodline magic, and in fact, it had been enhanced. Ino slowly raised his head and gazed at the clear blue sky. He had a vague feeling that if he wished, he could bring on winter. The real winter has arrived, not the magical manipulation of the weather as before. Still staring blankly and giggling? Let's go. With these nuts, we won't have to starve this winter. Jumping down from the tree trunk, Hermione patted the swan staring blankly at the sky. Oh, right. And Odette, she's growing up too. A silver and gray sea otter chattered on along the forest path. On her back was a package made of leaves. The package was bulging and jingled as she walked. Inexplicably, Ino felt a sense of familiarity. When he set up a fortune-telling stall in front of the elementary school, he also liked to tie some broken wind chimes he found to his canvas bag. A unique charm arose spontaneously. There's still one chapter left, around 9 o'clock, and everything will be explained clearly. Zyodi is working hard on the revisions now. If you're listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means they downloaded and uploaded it without effort. We cordially invite you to visit our channel, Mundo Fanfic Novelis. There you'll find the original version of this story and you can explore many other novels of various genres. We're waiting for you to immerse yourself in a world of incredible novels. Chapter 372 The Truth of Everything. The silent winter descended quietly. The river, once silver and shimmering with ripples, was now covered in ice and snow. In a sheltered tree hollow on the riverbank, a tiny sea otter snuggled beneath a black swan's wing. The soft, warm feel of the solid velvet made the otter half close his eyes. For a long moment, I don't want to go back, Hermione said. Her current life made her feel incredibly happy, peaceful, tranquil, and far from all the hustle and bustle. While there were some annoying elements in the forest, like the cunning fox or the noisy ducks, it didn't matter. Hugging each other, Ino sensed Hermione's emotions, but he could do nothing to stop them. No one can stay in this story. The story ends, we have to leave. But what about the future? Hermione asked reluctantly. Let's leave it to the future. There's a lot I don't know. Ino spoke calmly. Compared to Hermione's reluctance, he cared more about Teacher Haunce's answer. Almost a year had passed, and the ugly duckling had undergone a profound transformation. By the time he became a white swan, all his problems would have been resolved. As Ino finished speaking, Hermione stopped asking. After more than a year of solitude, she had learned a great deal, and she knew that Ino sometimes couldn't make decisions, often just passively accepting them. Their conversation ended, and the small tree hole fell silent. Only the rustling of the cold wind outside became the sole melody. Someone once said that the arrival of winter actually means spring is not far away. When the snow melts and the grass sprouts, it heralds the dawn of a new year. The forest, blooming with spring flowers, was as beautiful as ever. Under the clear blue sky, two swans, one black and one white, sauntered side by side. But what was surprising was that on the black swan's back, a 1.5 foot long sea otter lay. To the sea otter's back, a suitcase was tied with 2 ropes. From a distance, it looked like a child carrying a school bag. Odette, go back. You don't have to see us off. The world ahead doesn't belong to you. In the sky, Hermione turned and spoke to the white swan beside her. Will we meet again? Odette, once the ugly duckling, now the white swan, asked with a sad tone. I don't know. But I will never forget you. Hermione's tone was equally melancholic. In the sky, Ino remained silent, soaring silently, as if transformed into the most excellent coachman. In truth, he didn't know what to say either. For a year and a half, Hermione had devoted herself to the ugly duckling's upbringing. From feeding and accompanying it during its infancy, to guiding it as it grew, to even waving her otter paws whenever it was bullied, Hermione would fight back. It could be said that Hermione truly raised the ugly duckling. Meanwhile, the soaring white swan seemed truly obedient, and upon Hermione's persuasion, she stopped following. Before departing, it plucked a feather from its long, rosy beak and carried it to Hermione, then turned and flew off toward the dreamy forest behind them. Horizontal ellipsis. Just as they had arrived, they departed at dawn. Facing the rising sun, Ino carried Hermione across the sky. At dusk, they arrived at a coastal fishing village again. It was the same beach, the same bitter orange tree, and beneath it sat the same figure, middle-aged Hans, seemingly waiting for something. Ino slowly descended, and the moment it touched the ground, the black swan and the sea otter vanished, replaced by 2 figures of nearly identical height. 18 months later, Hermione had long shed the immaturity of her school days. Now, she resembled the former Boxburton's warrior Fleur. Her tall figure and sculpted features were that of a fully grown woman. I'll wait here, Hermione said, shaking her head slightly. She knew well that there were things she could participate in and others she shouldn't. Just like now, Ino's meeting with middle-aged Hans, she had no intention of participating, even though she had learned everything over the past 18 months. After Hermione finished speaking, Ino nodded slightly and walked alone towards the Bitterman tree. Beneath the tree. A year and a half had passed, and middle-aged Hans remained unchanged, though his expression had grown more melancholic. Ino sat quietly beside him, not asking any questions, as if entering a fantasy world for the first time. It was an accident. As Ino sat down, middle-aged Hans slowly began to speak. Everything started as an accident. Once upon a time, I just wanted to make my story more interesting. As he spoke, middle-aged Hans pulled a crudely bound book from his cloth pocket. Take a look. The answers you seek are all inside. Hearing this, Ino had a vague idea in mind, but he still took the book. The paper was rough, as if made of palm leaves. As the book opened, the contents written on one side in red and blue ink became clearly visible. A familiar name, a familiar story. This was probably the earliest version of the story of Hans. As he flipped through the pages, Ino noticed many differences. Red ink, like an outline, always appeared at turning points, while the remaining 95% of the story was written in blue. Take the ugly duckling, for example. Red ink appears only 3 times: at the beginning, when a swan egg unexpectedly appears in a duck's nest; in the middle, when the ugly duckling is bullied; and at the end, when the ugly duckling transforms into a white swan. The book isn't extensive, with dozens of stories, both long and short, and it draws to a close in less than an hour. However, toward the end, Ino came across his own conjecture. A little boy accidentally pushes open the bathroom door and enters a magical world. Honestly, he wasn't surprised at first. But as he flipped through the book, a sense of wonder washed over him. It's a long story, and the beginning is all very good, focusing on a little boy's escape from an orphanage and the fantastical adventures that follow. Honestly, Ino thought this was normal, but what surprised him was the rest of the book. After the story of old John the Shoemaker, the rest of the story was filled with large blanks, either covered by snowflake-like symbols, or by intricate, dazzling inscriptions, even mysterious characters from Greek mythology. As Ino turned to the last page, the long missing red text reappeared, appearing 3 times on the same page for the first time. The little boy, having grown up, returned to his original place. Following this sentence, blue text described the Battle of Hogsmeade and Hermione's death. As if witnessing casualties, the red text reappeared. The little boy used the golden apple to save his friend. Ino also read the rest of the story, including his experiences with Hermione during this time. As his gaze shifted, the final red text appeared at the end of the page. Hans's story ends here. After closing the book and handing it back to Teacher Hans, Ino fell into deep thought. Without a doubt, his miracle was thanks to Hans. He should have continued to journey through various fairy tales, but something unexpected happened. Ever since leaving Old Johnstown before the start of his first year, the stories had begun to unravel. Though the memory was long ago, Ino still vividly remembered that upon entering Hogwarts, the first story he encountered was Narnia, followed by The Lord of the Rings, Grimm's fairy tales, Greek mythology. This shift, seemingly solely from his arrival at Hogwarts, made him think of magic. Then, middle-aged Hans's voice rang out again, "I'm so sorry. This was all an accident. I saw your fear and longing in the orphanage, and I wanted to bring a twist to my own story, so I took the initiative and invited you. But then, as you can see, after you entered that castle, an unknown change occurred, and the story became uncontrollable." At this, a hint of resignation crept into middle-aged Hans's voice. "I can't peer into the stories you've experienced, but to avoid any accidents, I planned to call you back. And the accident did happen." Ino took over. "Yes." Middle-aged Hans nodded in agreement. He exhaled softly and continued, "Fortunately, the ending isn't bad. While I still have the ability, I've revised the story." Listening to this, Ino suddenly felt a sense of farewell, akin to a bard finishing his tale and taking his final bow. "Teacher. Listen." Middle-aged Hans interrupted. "Remember what I told you when you first arrived?" Born of the tacit understanding between master and disciple, Ino paused for a moment before blurting out, "Time wears away only the skin, abandoning passion inevitably erodes the soul." "Yes. I'm not afraid of time." Middle-aged Hans nodded slightly, his gaze fixed on the vast ocean. "It's just that I no longer have that initial enthusiasm. Perhaps the moment I invited you in, my story was doomed to end." Somehow, Ino noticed that Teacher Hans had suddenly aged considerably. It wasn't a visual aging, his appearance remained the same, but rather a sense of age in his demeanor. If I had to find a metaphor, it would be Gandalf after destroying the One Ring, like the weariness and age of someone who had accomplished his mission. "Miss Otter." Middle-aged Hans called. His voice was soft, but carried clearly by the sea breeze to Hermione's ears. "Mr. Hans." Hermione slowly walked to the bitterling tree. "I'm sorry, because of me, you have experienced death." Middle-aged Hans raised his eyes, a hint of apology flashing in his sea-blue pupils. "Honestly, I have nothing to offer you. After all, I'm just a poor bard." Middle-aged Hans chuckled, and as Ino and Hermione watched, he slowly tore open the book. The page he tore open was exactly the one the little boy had pushed open to the bathroom. "As a bard, I can only give you stories, and, of course, the pen to write them with." Middle-aged Hans pulled another item from his pocket, a chestnut trunk about 9 inches long, sharpened at one end. "As for you, my student." Middle-aged Hans glanced at Ino again. He gently patted the wing-shaped harp at his waist and said in a casual tone, "This harp is for you. Don't think I don't know you've secretly played it many times." Ino had a sudden sense of foreboding. But before he could speak, the figure of Teacher Hans before him shone with a soft, starry light. The luminous body, along with the torn half of the book, slowly floated into the sky. 30 feet above the ground, the luminous body suddenly transformed into countless points of light. They resembled fireflies in spring, the stars on a midsummer night, and oil lamps in the cold of winter. As the points of light soared into the night sky. At that moment, whether it was a fantastical forest, a majestic city, a wild mountain village, a rolling snow-capped mountain, or the endless sea, animals, humans, elves, mermaids, even hidden old witches and demons, all raised their heads involuntarily. The summer night sky was truly beautiful, dotted with stars, radiant and brilliant. On the beach, the waves still lapped, the gentle sea breeze still lingered. An indefinite amount of time passed before Hermione spoke first, breaking the silence. "Is this the end of your story? At the cost of Mr. Hans's death?" Unconsciously, Hermione stopped addressing Mr. Hans and switched to Teacher. "Mr. Hans's story ends." Ino looked up at the starry sky. "But ours has only just begun. Besides, Mr. Hans isn't dead." He knew well that for someone like Mr. Hans, life and death couldn't be measured. It was like a wandering bard, finishing his tale, finding a simple inn and enjoying a good night's sleep. The next morning, the sun would rise, and he would be ready to travel far and wide to continue spreading his tale. "That's good. Honestly, I don't hate him at all." Hermione gently stroked the broken chestnut pen in her hands. In fact, the moment she took these things, she sensed a mysterious space in her mind. It was an icy path, lined with red maple trees filled with stories, a swaying icicle, and even a 70-foot-long ice anaconda. Hermione felt magically at her command over the space. She tried to urge the anaconda forward, for at the end of the path lay a valley teeming with flowers and a rainbow river. But unfortunately, she could only see the valley, unable to penetrate it at all. At the same time, Ino also bent down and picked up the wing-shaped accordion. Gently plucking the strings, a melodious sound emanated, softly accompanied by the sea breeze. Let's go back. It's been 18 months. Perhaps we've been forgotten. That's right. I miss Mom and Dad, too. Hermione nodded in agreement, then took Ino's hand. With a gust of sea breeze, the two figures disappeared along the shore. The story of Teacher Hots has come to an end, and the story of Ino is about to begin. Of course, there are also the Grimm brothers and other interesting stories. Chapter 373 18 months, Voldemort is afraid. Time, sometimes, is always unclear. 18 months can take a chick to grow and metamorphose into a swan. Similarly, 18 months can bring a cloud over the English wizarding world once again. The Lestrange Mansion. In a luxuriously decorated, yet slightly dated, living room. The long oval table was packed, yet you could hear a pin drop. Ha, this is truly fascinating. Resurrection from the dead, this even transcends magic. Voldemort sat at the head of the table. Though he smiled, his crimson eyes were icy cold. The laughter died down after a while. You know what? The greatest sign of a fool is a deep hatred for someone they've never met, and pride in things they've never done. I don't want you to become fools, like Barty Crouch Jr. Voldemort spoke calmly, looking around at the 20 or so people below him, expressions ranging from respectful to enthusiastic. Without exception, these people were the deepest and most loyal Death Eaters imprisoned in Azkaban. In the past, Voldemort might have ignored these people, but now, seeing hope, they were invaluable aides, at least able to gather crucial information. Voldemort was deeply disgusted by Barty's presumptuous actions. Not only did this violate their previous agreement, it also created a mortal enemy. Even if Barty surrendered to the Ministry, many things can't be mended. Once a rift has appeared, patching it up only delays time. And that's what he was trying to do now, especially after learning of Swinburne's sudden appearance. The secret of resurrection, the rules behind the dice. He wanted everything, but now was not the time. He had to wait until Dumbledore was dealt with before he could properly plan anything. Thinking of this, Voldemort glanced at the burly wizard. Fenrir, how many stray werewolves have you gathered? Fenrir Ragberg, a vicious and notorious werewolf, acted like a well-behaved student when his name was called, looking terrified. Master, I have only gathered 276 werewolves so far. The rest were persuaded by Remus Lupin in exchange for Wolfsbane potion. With this, Fenrir fell silent, lowering his head, bracing himself for punishment. To his surprise, the expected punishment didn't come, but instead a slightly comforting reassurance. 276? That's enough. Voldemort said from the main seat, his tone unchanged. My dear professor always considers the greater good. Let's disrupt his overall situation. Let these werewolves begin raiding muggles. They don't need to achieve spectacular success, but they can't sit idle. The calm voice uttered the most chilling words. Below, with the exception of Bella, Judson, and the others who looked indifferent, Fenrir, Lucius, and the others all paled. Fenrir thought of the werewolves he had painstakingly recruited, only to be abandoned in the blink of an eye. It was easy to imagine that one day his turn would come. As for Lucius, he was thinking even more deeply. Attacking muggles and causing panic was a direct violation of the Statute of Secrecy. Once the Statute of Secrecy was broken, it could be disastrous. This was no longer just a matter for wizards. Voldemort sat at the head of the table, quietly observing the crowd below. Though each one was a master of expression control, their inner thoughts were bound to be inconsistent. He didn't bother to care, all he needed to do was carry out his orders. As for what they were thinking, that was unimportant. That's all for today. Fenrir and Lucius will remain. After a moment's silence, Voldemort concluded the brief meeting. As the crowd departed, the Lestrange ancestral home grew quieter. Lucius. Voldemort began slowly. The Malfoys' gaze is as sharp as ever. I even feel a tinge of jealousy. Master, Lucius stood, wanting to make his point. Relax. Sit down and talk, Voldemort waved. I don't intend to do anything to you. Take this letter to Swinburne. Although Bard EJR has surrendered, there must be an explanation for this matter. Hearing these words, Lucius was deeply moved. In his seemingly calm tone, he could hear a sense of helplessness and relief. In reality, Voldemort felt the same way at that moment. He had no choice but to compromise, otherwise, if Swinburne and Dumbledore joined forces, he would have no chance of victory. As for relaxation, honestly, since Swinburne's sudden disappearance from Hogwarts, he had been constantly on guard for the past year and a half. The terrifying thing about Slytherin snakes is that they hide in the shadows, waiting for the right moment to deliver a fatal blow. It was precisely for this reason that he rescued these Death Eaters. Having spies spread out was always better than relying on one person's defense. Now, there was no need for that. Although Swinburne didn't make a high-profile appearance, he still made a fleeting appearance at the Ministry of Magic. It was just a meeting with Fudge, but that was enough. Lucius left, carrying with him a letter that weighed heavily on his mind. On the afternoon after his departure, in the Stone Quarter of Manchester, London, in a standard middle-class three-story building, Ino slowly lowered the letter in his hand in the guest room, his face expressionless. What happened? Hermione, having spent so much time with him, immediately saw the problem. Ino wasn't surprised by Hermione's observation. She shook her head slightly and chuckled. It's just a small matter. Voldemort's letter, he's scared. Huh? The Dark Lord is scared too? Hard to imagine, Hermione teased with a smile. She had been home for 3 days since the story ended, and her parents, with Lockhart's help, had regained their memories. Living in her own home, with her parents and loved one by her side, made her feel very happy. So what are you going to do? Hermione asked tentatively. Although she was asking, she didn't want to disrupt her existing rhythm of life. Hermione had guessed Ino's thoughts a moment ago, and now Ino understood Hermione's feelings as well, but there were some things he wouldn't compromise on. Hermione, you should know that just because a venomous snake has been dormant for a short time, you can't pretend it doesn't exist. Otherwise, who knows what it might come out and bite you. I know that, but Bartlett is already in Azkaban. Hermione sighed softly. She knew Ino was right. For a girl, her parents and her partner were everything in her life. Perhaps children would be added to the mix in the future, but that was for the future. Hermione sighed, and the atmosphere in the guest room grew heavy. Meanwhile, after a moment's thought, Ino took over. Don't worry. He won't get away this time. Besides, I'll find a true prophet this time, otherwise Horcruxes will always be a problem. He knew about Bartlett's surrender. After all, Fudge had already mentioned this when he'd asked Lockhart to restore Hermione's parents' memories. But some things weren't simply a matter of surrendering. Just like a wizard's crop. If the tail isn't cut off in time, violating the statute of secrecy and being discovered by muggles, the Ministry of Magic always punishes the wizard who owned the dog. As he spoke, Ino raised his palm, his fingertips flicking one by one, slowly plucking the harp in his arms. A soothing melody rang out. Though the tune was simple, it possessed the feel of a country ballad. As if by magic, the simple notes transformed into the gurgling of water and the gentle breeze. The sound washed away the slight sense of oppression that had just settled in the room. Chapter 374 Snape's Visit. At Granger House. After slowly strumming his harp, Ino fell silent. This time, he planned to personally visit the alien-eyed prophet trapped in the tower and discover the whereabouts of Voldemort's final Horcrux. Unlike his own imposter fortune-teller, who could only use dice to determine the probability of success, a prophet with vision could see through the crystal ball whatever he desired, whether it was future events or people in the present. Compared to Trelawney, whose powers were sometimes inconsistent, Ino trusted Grindelwald's abilities more, though appealing to him might come at a price. But compared to Voldemort, Grindelwald, a wizard once so powerful but now filled with sorrow and despair, seemed safe. In mid-August in London, time seemed to slow down. Every breeze seemed to carry the lingering warmth of summer and the gentle coolness of early autumn. 7 days after the story concluded, Granger House welcomed its first visitor, a guest both expected and understandable. Ino wasn't surprised by Snape's visit. He'd waited a full week, showing restraint. Professor. Some things can be replicated, but some things are truly unique. In the guest room, Ino got straight to the point. Hermione's resurrection couldn't be replicated. Not to mention the golden apple, even the world where teacher haunts existed couldn't be re-entered. The pages recording the story had been torn apart, like separating children. While the ancestral home was familiar, there was no reason to live there again. Snape, on the other hand, seemed to have anticipated this answer and didn't show any overreaction. Only when he knew for sure that resurrection was impossible did the light in his eyes dim. "I knew it," Snape said calmly. Seeing this, Ino was helpless and could only respond with silence. While he still had the ice flower, whether it could bring back someone who had been dead for over a decade and whose body had decayed was, of course, unknown. Since it was unknown, he didn't want to say anything. After all, the cruelest thing in the world is to give someone hope and then fail to keep it. Ino didn't want to use tricks to keep Snape in suspense, even though it was easy and could easily subjugate a potions master. But there are things you can do, and things you can't. In the guest room, Ino and Snape sat across from each other, and silence seemed to prevail. Faintly, they could hear the television outside, and Hermione's occasional laughter. "I understand. If you need any help, feel free to write to me." After receiving the actual answer, Snape slowly stood up and began to leave. "Professor, wait a minute," Ino quickly stopped him. "Professor, what solutions have you come up with regarding Harry?" Honestly, he didn't have much to say about the protagonist of this story, but sometimes he couldn't ignore Snape's feelings. In fact, the entire story, spread over 7 years, only told one story: Harry's discovery of the Horcruxes and their destruction. Interestingly, in the end, Harry also destroyed himself. Although fate intervened, the ending was a happy one, and Harry didn't truly die. The so-called happy ending probably required a prerequisite: Voldemort's resurrection required Harry's blood. But things were different now. After all, Voldemort had been resurrected using the blood of Barty Crouch Sr. The difference was more than a fraction. In the guest room, Snape slowly sat down again after hearing Harry's name. "I'm trying to find a solution to the problem, using potions." "Potions?" Ino raised an eyebrow in confusion. He didn't doubt his ability, but he had never heard of potions targeting the soul. Meanwhile, Snape didn't intend to hide anything from Ino's doubts. In reality, there were probably no fools in this world. Snape knew that Ino could easily resurrect and deceive him with lies, even controlling him. Even knowing it was a lie, he would willingly be driven by that elusive hope. But in reality, the promise he had expected didn't materialize. The students before him simply admitted that he couldn't be resurrected. Snape felt a complex situation regarding this outcome. A feeling of misfortune and a touch of luck washed over him simultaneously. "Yes. Potions. The Wolfsbane potion has inspired me." Snape, with conflicting feelings, calmly expressed his thoughts. Wolfsbane, a question that has baffled wizards for millennia, remains unanswered. Much like discussing nightmares, there remains no definitive answer. Even with the sudden emergence of the Wolfsbane potion, it remains the same: no answer. Meanwhile, Snape's narration continued. "Aconitum, black root, and the venom of the acromantula, extract and brew it, and you'll create a slow-acting, irreversible poison, a poison that damages the soul." Snape spoke calmly, especially when discussing the poison. His tone was as unwavering as if he were drinking a glass of pumpkin juice. Unlike the narrator's calmness, Ino's heart was in turmoil. At that moment, he truly admired Snape. His talent for potions was truly well-deserved. Inspired by the Wolfsbane potion, developing a similarly self-destructive potion was beyond the imagination of any ordinary wizard. If it truly was what they had, it was undoubtedly the most reliable method. Voldemort's soul fragments were, after all, acquired, and their strength could never surpass Harry's. But the only thing that surprised him was how Snape knew the potion's effects. A soul-destroying potion, especially one that inflicted damage slowly, couldn't be determined simply by opening the lid and sniffing it or casting a escaping apparition charm. Although surprised, Ino didn't intend to delve into the details. Everyone has secrets, just as Snape had never asked about the details of his resurrection. For some things, the answer was sufficient, the details were never important. Just like now, with the answer to Harry's question, Ino felt even more confident about what was coming next. He wouldn't be caught off guard again. Similarly, at that moment, Ino felt truly unpredictable. Voldemort, who championed pure-bloodedness, had his fate sealed in the home of a Muggle. Austria, located in Central Europe and influenced by Atlantic breezes, has a typical temperate broadleaf forest climate. In late August, the temperature in Austria had actually dropped to around 10 degrees Celsius, making it very refreshing and pleasant. As a landlocked country, Austria doesn't have much to offer. For Muggles, only Vienna's Schönbrunn Palace, a world-famous attraction dating back to the Roman period, holds global renown. But for wizards, especially those of advanced age, there lies an unforgettable castle, Nurmengard. 20 kilometers from Nurmengard Castle, the small town of Alpbach welcomed a young couple today. The passage of time brings not only character and experience, but also physical growth. Hermione, dressed in a silver gray tracksuit and pure white sneakers, accentuated her already tall figure, appearing even more heroic. Beside her, Ino wore the same tracksuit, albeit in a plain black. Hermione, you can wander around for a while. I have to complete my purpose first. As he spoke, Ino raised his head slightly, gazing westward toward the setting sun, though all he could see was a vast expanse of sparse trees. Today's Zyode sharing, Fenrir Greyback. Greyback was a notorious werewolf who loved to attack children. He sought to create enough werewolves to conquer wizards. He transformed Remus into a werewolf in revenge for his father. Malfoy once used him to threaten Borgin. During the Battle of the Astronomy Tower, he bit Bill in his untransformed state. Chapter 375 Grindelwald on the Tower. Unlike Austria's temperate broadleaf forest climate, the Scottish Highlands enjoy a truly temperate maritime climate. In late August, the average temperature in the Scottish Highlands is at least 15 degrees Celsius. In the Hogwarts Transfiguration office, Professor McGonagall sat at her desk, lost in thought. She had already signed off on this year's freshman notices, but the correspondence for the seniors had yet to be completed. This would have seemed unthinkable in the past. Professor McGonagall's role is crucial to the smooth running of Hogwarts. If she slacked off, the entire Hogwarts would be in serious trouble. After a long pause, Professor McGonagall sat quietly at her desk, sighing deeply. Then, gently, she opened a scroll, the one she was most reluctant to open, the list of sixth-year students. She was reluctant because it contained two names she hated to see, the dimly lit Hermione Granger and the missing Ino Swinburne. These two were her favorite students, and could even be considered the bridge between the Transfiguration Club and its successors. The once lively Transfiguration Club had faded with the graduation of Cedric and the departure of Hermione and Ino. The once small class of 4 was now reduced to a single member, 7th year Cho Chang. Thinking of this, Professor McGonagall glanced out the window. The Forbidden Forest in late August had already begun to wither, its prematurely fallen leaves already blown away by the autumn wind. She pushed her glasses up on her nose with a finger, then turned her gaze to the open album. Suddenly, Professor McGonagall slammed the table with a resounding thud. Albus Dumbledore. The contents of the album infuriated her. Although she had always known he was out of character, as deputy headmistress, it wasn't a big deal to have to do more. She had always tolerated any absurdity, but today's incident was unbearable. Making fun of a dead student truly crossed Professor McGonagall's line. She watched as the once familiar, dim name, now regained its former luster. Long-term depression, sadness, loss, regret, all flooded into her heart, and then turned into anger. Professor McGonagall slammed the table and stood up. Now she didn't care about her work. She picked up the page on the table, stood up and walked towards the door. She was going to have a big fight now, a big fight with the current headmaster of Hogwarts, the greatest white wizard of the 20th century. Unlike what happened in the Scottish Highlands, Ino had already embarked on the journey to find the prophet with heterochromia. According to the information he had consulted, the distance from the small town of Alpbach to Nurmengard was about 20 kilometers. This should have been a long way, but in fact, it took less than 2 minutes to see the tower of the abandoned castle in the distance. But even so, Ino didn't have time to care. Because he was immersed in a special state at the moment. In the vast woods, a slightly melancholic folk song slowly began to play. The safflowers sing, accompanied by the scent of kiwi fruit. The bare tree stumps glow green, surrounded by herb servants and flower servants. The faint song was carried away by the wind. In the desolate and dilapidated tower of Nurmengard, a thin, plainly dressed elderly man slowly opened his eyes. How much influence do eyes have on a person? The answer is a profound influence, even directly altering a person's entire senses. If the old man in the tower had seemed a pitiful person before, After opening those eyes that saw through the world and reflected the vicissitudes of life, he had transformed into a reclusive sage, or a learned scholar. Atop the desolate tower, Grindelwald stood by the window, peering down through the empty, barely a foot-wide window. Not far away, in the broadleaf forest, a young man in Muggle attire, clutching a harp, approached with an almost magical rhythm. This feeling of wonder stemmed from the seemingly slow pace of his steps, yet each one seemed to cover vast distances. It was as if a single, foot-long stride could span towering snow-capped mountains, rolling meadows, and even the boundless ocean. Of course, this was an exaggeration. In reality, each stride covered only tens or hundreds of meters, but the allure and feeling were truly present. Grindelwald stood at the tower window, listening to the gentle, morning breeze-like song while awaiting his arrival. Truth be told, although the castle remained unguarded, over half a century had passed without a single visitor to Nurmengard. Elder wizards, understanding Grindelwald's decision, showed respect by refraining from intrusion. The younger generation, influenced by the victors, assumed the castle held the most formidable dark wizards and remained cautious. Today, the desolate castle seemed poised to welcome its first visitor. But, just as the other person was about to exit the broadleaf forest, his entire figure suddenly vanished. High in the tower, Grindelwald's eyes, piercing the world, held a rare hint of doubt and puzzlement. Horizontal ellipsis. Grindelwald was puzzled, and as the person involved, Ino was equally surprised. After bidding farewell to Hermione, he had originally set out towards Nurmengard. But upon entering the broadleaf forest, a subtle sigh of admiration filled him. In the early autumn forest, the surrounding trees naturally blended into the changing seasons. A profound and tranquil beauty. The sunlight, no longer as blazing as in midsummer, became soft and gentle. The trees within the forest gradually shifted from their original emerald green to yellow-green and orange-red, as if the creator had accidentally overturned a palette. In this atmosphere, Ino felt a sense of nostalgia. He recalled his first time in Middle-earth, the land of the forest elves, a broadleaf forest like this. The story of the Hobbit ended, and so did the story of the Lord of the Rings. Time flies, things change, and people change. Everyone else has died or grown old, but he remains youthful. Thinking of this, Ino slowed his pace and took out the wing-shaped harp left by his teacher, Hans. He'd acquired the harp nearly 2 weeks earlier. Though he'd played it before, it was always for the sake of experimentation, to see its unique qualities. But today, at this very moment, he simply treated the harp as an instrument. In the silent broadleaf forest, with the first note, everything around him seemed to shift, a unique rhythm taking hold. As the performer, Ino remained oblivious. Strolling through the woods, he continued to play, just as he had in the elven forest. His slender fingers danced and glided across the strings, like a fluttering deer or a fluttering butterfly, nimble and graceful. Each note seemed to come alive, imbued with emotion and possessing a subtle energy. In the woods. Ino thought of the Shire before the story began, that peaceful and tranquil land. Thus, the sound of the harp didn't seem to soften, its delicate timbre like gently swaying dewdrops in the morning light, like waves of ripening wheat in autumn. But soon, the sound became sonorous and powerful, a rich and deep melody rising, like scattered dewdrops gathering into a river, flowing endlessly. In his mind, he thought of the Battle of 5 Armies, of the charge of the Rohan. The ancient story unfolded page by page, then turned again. Finally, the scene froze on the Shire again. Suddenly, Ino felt a long-lost palpitation. It was like his first time entering a fairy tale world on his 10th birthday, a feeling both familiar and strange. Truthfully, after Teacher Hans tore open the pages of the book, he should have been unable to enter the fantasy world again. Perhaps the only 2 worlds he could enter were Arad and Middle-earth, the 2 stable worlds in Sanctuary. But now, the palpitations he felt again made him return to the colorful valley without a second thought. Yes, the valley. Like a transfer of authority, the once frozen path was no longer his first goal. Although he could visit it, that path seemed to favor Hermione more. In the valley. Ino stood on the soft ground, silent. Everything in the valley shocked him. Of course, the herb fields were still the herb fields, the marble house had not changed, and even the oak trees were the same as before. The individual had not changed, but the whole had changed. The colorful river floating in the sky seemed to have broken away from its static state and began to truly meander. And the tulips that once gave birth to the Ring of Fire also emitted a brilliant light. End of this chapter. Thank you very much for reaching the end. Don't forget to like. Looking for more exclusive content and immediate access? Subscribe to our Patreon. Remember, every like, subscription, or donation encourages us to continue. Thanks to everyone. See you in the next video.